Hey everyone, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for helping me reach 100 subscribers. I honestly couldn't have done this without your love, support, and constant encouragement. Every like, comment, and subscribe means a lot to me. Now let's keep this journey going. Our next target is 200 subscribers, and I know we can do it together. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's grow as a family. Thank you once again. When Luffy vanishes inside ancient ruins, the Straw Hats are pulled into a terrifying journey through his past. Trapped within Luffy's memories, the crew witnesses moments of brotherhood with Ace and Sabo, childhood pain, and scars Luffy never shared. As past and present blur, the Straw Hats must confront truths that were never meant for them to see, learning what truly shaped their captain. To escape, they must not only find Luffy, but also come to terms with the weight of the memories he carried alone. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Warm Memories and Brotherly Bonds by RoseDragonWitch. Respect to author.
Chapter 28, Cheaters and Memories. Part of the forest that the Straw Hats were in at that moment was mostly destroyed. They were all gasping for breath, and Zoro, in anger, hacked down several trees in a way to vent some of his frustration. "Would you knock it off?" Nami asked him in deep annoyance as he continued to go on his mini-rampage. "Destroying trees won't bring it back, will it?" "Why not?" he demanded darkly. "Maybe if we destroy this whole island it'll come back out." "For once, I'd agree," Sanji hissed as he caught his breath and sat down on one of the tree stumps. "I'm getting sick of all this. If that thing wants to fight us, why not come out and face us already instead of running away?" Flashback. "Yo-ho-ho-ho, I have never heard such a more beautiful sound," Brook said dreamily as the memories of them riding down the inflatable octopus disappeared and they ended up in the middle of a thick forest. "Such a ringing sound almost makes me embarrassed by my own music." "Nothing can compare to it," Robin agreed. "I'm glad that some parts of the city of Shandora managed to survive despite everything that happened. The bell was truly the heart of the ancient city, so as long as the bell survives, I don't think the city will ever truly be gone." "That's good," Sanji muttered. "Though I'm sorry I missed most of the action." "Damn that Eneru. At least he was taken care of," Zoro reminded him. "So long as we never see him again is all I want," Usopp said firmly. But no sooner were the words out of his mouth did Zoro and Sanji both spin around, ready for a fight. "For crying out loud, would you stop hiding and fight like a man?" Zoro yelled, pulling two swords out this time, and his temper now sky high. "I'm sick of this stupid game." "What are you talking about?" Frankie asked before his eyes widened in realization. "You mean?" Chopper cried out anxiously, but before he could finish his question, light flashed once again as the ball of slime reappeared. Sitting cross-legged on a slime version of the surprise cloud, was a familiar face, one that they weren't overjoyed to see. Yet at the same time, none of them were surprised to see him. "Hesso," the slime Eneru said to them, the staff over his shoulder and the arrogant smile on his face. End of flashback. "I'm so sick and tired of this stupid thing," Frankie growled out, picking up a rock with his metal hands and crushing it to dust. "How the hell are we supposed to get that thing back to the ruins when we don't have the slightest idea where the ruins are anymore?" "I know the direction," Robin answered, her eyes closed, as she used her powers to see across the island. "I know how to get there, the problem is to lure that thing in." Like catching fish with a hook and line, Usopp sighed as Chopper put a salve on Usopp's burnt hand. "And is it me, or did that slime have some real power?" "This thing is getting more dangerous," Zoro answered once he had calmed down and sat on another tree stump. "No lightning, but it was able to heat up that staff." "What were you thinking grabbing hold of it? That freak was trying to break my neck with it." Usopp retorted, "I had no choice. I didn't think that it would burn me." "This is just sad," Sanji muttered bitterly. "It's like back in the old days when we couldn't fight those stupid Logia types. What was the point in mastering hockey if we can't fight against one slimeball?" "I think we can agree that thing's not of this world," Robin muttered with a sigh as she stared off in the direction that the slime disappeared to. "If this island is connected to the land of the dead," her eyes suddenly widened in shock as if she just realized something. "What's the matter, Robin?" Chopper asked as she turned around to look at them. "I think that's the whole problem," she said at once as she stood up. "Maybe that's why nothing we do can hurt that thing. Because maybe weapons of this world cannot hurt it." "Wait, what do you mean it can't be killed by weapons of this world?" Zoro asked at once as he stood up. "Because if I'm right, then it makes sense," she answered him. "That thing is not of this world. So anything that belongs in this world cannot hurt it." "Hold on." Usopp gulped as he got up as well. "You mean so that's why nothing we do can hurt that thing?" "It would explain a lot," Brook whispered. "What now?" Nami screamed out, looking as pale as a ghost. "How are we supposed to fight if nothing we do can ever hurt it?" "It's getting stronger and stronger." Before it couldn't even hold onto its shape, but here, not only could Usopp touch it, but it was able to hurt him. And when it was crocodile, it stabbed Zoro. Maybe that's why Ace told us to lure it back to the ruins, she said thoughtfully. Maybe we can trap it there or something. But that's what we have to do. We don't need to worry about fighting it if nothing we do can hurt it. So instead, we have to make sure that we're able to get it back to the ruins. And what then? Frankie asked at once, punching his fists together. I'm all for taking that thing out, but how's fighting it at that freaky old temple going to change anything? Shut up, Sanji snapped back. If Robin-chan says we get it back to the ruins, then we're gonna do it. I'm all for trying anything to get that shitty blob out of our lives. But before anyone could think of a good plan, the memories started up again, and this time they were still on the Mary and floating down through the air with the octopus still tied to them like a balloon. They were still high up, but the sun had gone down and they seemed to be drifting through the night sky. All of them were growing frustrated by this point, but again, they knew there wasn't much they could do but wait for their friend to show up again. Beautiful, Brook said in wonder as he walked to the side of the ship and stared out, memories of their task once again vanishing from his mind. You know, this almost reminds me of when we were sailing up from Fishman Island. Like we're sailing through a sea of stars. This was one of my fondest memories, Robin smiled, as she looked around. It's something I'll never forget. In fact, most of my memories since joining this crew are good ones that I don't ever want to forget. I know what you mean, Nami laughed. This was their life now, and the days just seemed to fly by in a happy blur. Though they had a lot of dangerous and terrifying experiences, she knew that she wouldn't have traded them for anything. She sighed, only sad that they had to miss out on 2 whole years of adventures with each other. Well, she glanced to the star-filled sky and gave a quiet prayer that they could stay together from here on out. It sure took us forever to fall, Zoro commented, and she came out of her thoughts. He was looking at their past selves, who were all gathered around the deck and talked with each other. I mean, how long had been up in the air like this? Longer than we thought it would take, Sanji agreed, but then again, we were up 10,000 feet, so I suppose that it would make sense that it would take us so long to fall since we were only floating down. Well, it sure took a long time, Zoro yawned. We were up here for hours. What were you complaining about? Usopp asked suddenly. All you did was sleep. But the memory Straw Hats seemed to be growing impatient as well. In fact, Memory Zoro was sitting up, having just woke up from his nap, and asked how much longer it was going to take. Go to sleep, Memory Usopp said sharply just as they could all hear Luffy's voice calling from above them. Where is he now? Frankie asked. Getting himself into trouble, what else? Nami asked in annoyance. Really, did they even have to babysit him on their own ship? Who was watching him here? Well, we didn't think that he could get into trouble while we were up here. Usopp told her. What happened? Brook asked. That rubber idiot almost got us killed, Sanji said in bitterness. Before Brook could ask, their past selves had discovered that Luffy had climbed on top of the octopus's head and was now bouncing up and down like on a trampoline. Yo-ho-ho-ho, that sounds like fun, Brook said happily. No, it wasn't. Chopper whimpered as Memory Nami screamed up at Luffy, hey, don't do anything stupid. All our lives depend on this balloon. You hear me? We should have gotten him down anyway, Zoro sighed. Yeah, Nami added dully, I should have known better. Okay, now I really wanna know what you're talking about, Frankie muttered, suddenly having a bad feeling to all this. Let's just say that the ride to the Blue Sea ended a lot sooner than it would have been, Robin chuckled a little as they looked to her. Don't worry, Luffy laughed as they were all looking over the side and up at him. But Memory Sanji had turned deadly pale and was screaming out in a commanding voice that left no room for argument, Luffy stop. Get down right now, you sound kind of freaked out here, bro, Frankie said slowly as Memory Nami asked him what he was yelling about. The octopus is shrinking, he yelled as he jumped up and began climbing up one of the tentacles to get Luffy. If we don't do something, we'll fall.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
It's shrinking. Brook gasped in shock as he looked up with everyone else at the octopus's underside, and they all realized that he was right. It looked a lot smaller than it had been before. That's not good, Frankie said, so that's what you meant. As endearing as his childlike personality is sometimes, it's gotten us all in a lot of trouble, Nami sighed as her past self ran to the side of the Mary and gazed down at the sea below them. They were still as high as a mountain. What are we going to do? Her memory self cried to the others, we're still really high up in the air. If we got Luffy off there, I think we would have floated down to the sea without any trouble, Usopp muttered as they heard Memory Sanji yelling at Luffy above them. But I guess he knocked so much air out that it couldn't hold on anymore. Suddenly the whole ship jerked and Sanji and Luffy went tumbling down from above them, rolling right over the edge and down past them. Frank and Brook screamed with the past Straw Hats as they ran to the edge to look. Luckily, Luffy saved them by grabbing onto the side, and stretched out his other arm to grab Sanji. He still owes me a pack of cigarettes, Sanji muttered in annoyance as his fingers itched to go to one of his last 2 smokes. I ended up dropping a full box of them because of that stunt. But Luffy was laughing. That was scary. He said happily, wonder why the octopus isn't bouncy anymore. I told you it's shrinking, bonehead. Memory Sanji yelled at him as everyone sighed in relief, just glad to see that they were alright. But then they realized that the wind picked up and they were suddenly falling much faster, falling so fast that their feet were actually starting to leave the deck. Oh, this is bad. Brook cried out fearfully as they were steadily picking up speed and Luffy and Sanji were actually floating in the air as they continued to hang desperately onto the side of the ship. That's weird, Luffy said, no longer sounding like he was having fun. How'd the ship get below us? They were all screaming as they clung onto the ship as the violent wind felt like it was about to tear the ship into pieces and the roaring sound it made was almost deafening. What are you guys gonna do now? Frankie yelled out, truly unable to think of how they got out of this mess. And with the Mary in the shape that she was in, there's no way that she'd survive the impact now. We're gonna hit the sea so hard we'll sink to the bottom. Memory Nami screamed, only if the ship doesn't shatter first. Past Robin yelled back, do you have to scare us all the time, Robin? Current Usopp yelled at their Robin over the noise. But she's right. Frankie yelled, the ship is falling apart at the seams. She won't make it. But Memory Usopp refused to let that happen. He quickly reached for his bag and pulled out his Usopp Aw and a pair of what looked like miniature octopuses on his feet. He did something uncharacteristically brave. He jumped over, swung underneath the ship, and was able to use a bunch of breath dials to greatly slow down the descent of their fall. They didn't return to the gentle float downwards as it had been before, but they certainly slowed down, to a speed that was sure to keep the Mary from breaking apart. Awesome, Frankie yelled, truly impressed. That was very clever of you, Usopp-san, Brook said as Usopp beamed in pride here. Why can't you act like that more often? Zoro asked him. It was funny how when it came to the Mary, Usopp's personality changed, both in good ways, and bad. He shut his eye and briefly remembered seeing Luffy and Usopp standing opposite each other in the dead of night. Mary was very important to me. Usopp said firmly, we all owed her a lot. And I worked so hard every day to keep her afloat. Yes, but if Frankie-san was right, then she's pretty much reached the end of her life, hasn't she? Brook asked in concern, not understanding why everyone seemed to grow so tense when anyone mentioned how much Usopp loved that ship. Even Frankie, who they often shared bewildered looks to what was going on, seemed to understand what was going on. If he still had a face, he'd be frowning in concern, especially to the miserable expression on Usopp's face at the thought of the Mary. Usopp-san, Brook began, but their past selves were all laughing awkwardly, truly thinking they were safe, at least until the octopus suddenly shrank to the size of a normal octopus and they stared at it in horror before they started to fall faster once again. Luffy pulled Usopp back on board, grabbing him by the nose, and pulled him safely on board as they hung on, hoping for the best. Why? Usopp whimpered in pain, why does he always grab me by the nose? Everybody hold on to something, Luffy screamed over the roar, and with an almighty crash, they landed violently in the sea, splashing waves everywhere and getting everyone soaked as they almost ended up flooding the shop. That was close, Brook whispered. I would have thought that you were all done for sure there. It was a narrow miss, Zoro gasped as their past selves struggled for breath, trying to calm their racing hearts. I guess the breath dials were enough save us. Probably, Frankie nodded, the air blowing out created a kind of cushion just before you hit the water. It broke the fall so that you guys were killed. Way a good Usopp, Sanji told him as Usopp smirked, rubbing his finger across his nose proudly. Well, when push comes to shove, the great master Usopp becomes an awesome sea warrior. He bragged, you were great Usopp. Chopper chirped up as Memory Nami finally caught her breath and spit out some seawater, saying how scary that was and asking what happened to the octopus. Yes, it ran out of air, Memory Robin reasoned. Wonder how that happened. Past Sanji snarled, glaring at Luffy as the octopus landed on Luffy's face, who laughed once again. Hey, come on, he smiled as he pulled the octopus off his face, don't whine. We did get down here alive. Barely, Current Nami snapped. Doesn't anything faze him? You really need to ask. Robin asked her in amusement as past Sanji lit up another cigarette. You're right, he admitted grudgingly, as he looked put to the sky, a dreamy look in his eyes, and we got to see an incredible place. Incredible doesn't even begin to describe it, Current Chopper added softly, hoping that he could see that place once more someday. He'd love to see Isa, Canis, and the others again, he hoped they were doing alright. Now that we're down here, it looks so far away, Memory Robin said softly, looking up, and it was hard to believe that there was an island floating directly above them from here. They couldn't see anything but a dark sky. Like something out of a dream, Memory Nami agreed as Chopper sat up on deck, and agreed full-heartedly with her, asking them if they thought they'd see it again. Well, you might see something similar when you die, Memory Zoro said, his face unusually gentle as he looked at Chopper's happy expression. Not you, past Usopp informed him, I doubt you're going anyplace good. True, very true, Current Sanji said as past Zoro yelled at Usopp. Oh please, I guarantee that you're not going anywhere near heaven you jerk, Current Zoro snarled at Sanji. Never said that I was, he admitted as his past self got back to his feet and headed to the cabin, telling them that they could discuss the afterlife, but he was going to make a pot of coffee. After telling Luffy to be patient for dinner, their rubber captain got up and asked, "Hey. By the way." Suddenly lights came on and were pointed towards them like spotlights, and they could hear the sounds of a siren was going off with Marines surrounding them on all sides. Luffy finished awkwardly, "Does anybody know just where the heck we are? Hell, of all the places you could have ended up, you landed right smack dab in the middle of a Marine base." Frankie screamed as the memory faded around them. "You couldn't have had worse luck." Brook added in terror. "I forgot about that," Zoro muttered in surprise. "Yes, we landed right in the middle of the Marine base G8, also known as Navarone," Robin answered as she sat back down on a stump. "That was a very interesting adventure. How'd you get off the ship?" Frankie asked at once. "With Marines swarming everywhere. We didn't think," Nami sighed, "we just bailed out and hoped for the best." "I remember," Sanji sighed. "We were forced to abandon the ship as the stupid Marines came on board looking for us." "What happened to you all? How were you able to escape?" Brook asked in wonder. "We just did what zebras do," Robin smiled. You could almost see the question marks hanging above Frankie and Brook's head. "Zebras," they repeated. "Well, it's a known fact that lions eat zebras," she answered. "Zebras stick out like sore thumbs, however, lions don't get one every time, do they? That's because, unlike the chameleon, they don't need to blend in with their surroundings but rather with other zebras. A single zebra on its own wouldn't stand a chance against a pride of hungry lions, but when they're in a herd with other zebras they do. When they're in a herd, the lions can't tell where one stripe ends and another begins. When you look just like everyone else, you blend in, and when you blend in you're as good as invisible. Now, if we were able to get our hands on a few uniforms for example." "I get it." Frankie laughed. "You guys hid among the enemy. That's great." "Stupid if you ask me," Zoro said in annoyance. "That's because you were the first one caught and locked up in the brig." Sanji smirked and a very ugly look came over the swordsman's face as he glared at him. "You got caught?" Brook asked in surprise. That didn't sound like Zoro to him. "It wasn't my fault," Zoro snapped, jerking his thumb at Nami. "She's the one who got me caught. You were the one walking around the base without a care in the world." She yelled, "Don't you go blaming that on me. You would have been caught sooner or later anyway." "What are you talking about?" Frankie asked, not getting it. They gave him and Brook a quick talk about what happened. Separated, they were forced to disguise themselves and try to find each other and out of the base. It turned out that the entire base was comprised up of a huge mountain and surrounded by water with a ring of sheer rock cliffs that form a kind of wall. Sanji explained that he found Luffy and they were able to get by whilst impersonating a pair of famous cooks in the kitchens. His began to drool over the memory of Jessica, who he had was fawning over as he talked about how beautiful she was. "Get on with it," Zoro said in annoyance, and Sanji glared at him until Nami asked him what happened and he happily went on. He said that she insulted his cooking, and he decided to show her what it was to really cook. In the end he impressed all the Marines with his skills and taught them that though it's important for their food to taste good, but it's equally important to avoid wasting even a scrap of food. While they were in there, Nami added that she escaped the Mary on the waiver before she disguised herself as a janitor, which was a mistake because she was forced to clean. As she worked, she ended up running into Zoro, who was walking around the base without even bothering to try to hide, which Zoro added that it was because she threw his swords out the window that he got caught. "Hiding was stupid anyway," he said stubbornly. "You see," she yelled in frustration, "it doesn't matter if I got you caught or not. You would have been caught sooner or later." "Okay," Robin said, stepping between them to avoid a full fight. And to try and bring peace between them, she told them that she and Usopp had winded up in the same place for a short time before she went off to try and gather more information and he went off to try and find the Mary, so they went their separate ways. She laughed a little as she told them that she ended up meeting a special inspector from Marine HQ and she took his code and ID so that she could sneak in and meet the commander. A man named Jonathan. "That's cold sis," Frankie laughed when she told them how she left him unconscious in the hallway. "What about you, Usopp?" Chopper asked curiously, and Usopp merely shrugged, telling them that he managed to steal some Marine uniforms and disguised himself as a Marine rookie.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
He went around to try and find the Mary, meeting a shipwright named Mekau who told him that the ship needed some serious repairs or else it would sink. No one said anything to that as they all felt a pang of grief at the loss of their ship and friend. Controlling his tears, Usopp told them that one of the lieutenants found him and tricked him into admitting that he was a pirate, but when Robin arrived, disguised as the inspector, he tried to pretend he was her assistant and she told them that she was lying before being thrown into the brig. "It was for your own good, you know," she told him. "You were safer with Zoro. You were causing a lot of trouble. Besides," Sanji said at once, "who would believe that? It only would have gotten you both thrown behind bars and my Robin is too beautiful for that." This only made her all the more convincing, Nami added as Usopp sighed. Why is everyone against me? He asked. What about you, Chopper-san? Brook asked curiously. Chopper laughed and told them that he somehow ended up being brought to the medical center. All the other doctors had been called away from G8 except for Dr. Kabato, who couldn't stand the sight of blood and fainted at the littlest amount of it. Then, why is she a doctor? Zoro asked, sounding lost. Big baby, how could she call herself a doctor if she couldn't stand seeing a little blood? I know, Chopper said softly, but she toughened up. I helped her when a ship full of injured Marines came and she had to operate. So I dressed up like a doctor and helped her. I also ran into Nami, who was disguised as a nurse, and she helped. I guess that the janitor outfit didn't suit you. Frankie laughed as Sanji swooned at the memory of seeing Nami in a nurse's outfit. Oh, he'd break both his legs if he could have her there treating him. Nami sighed. Turns out no matter what disguise I'm in, I was screwed. Whatever happened to the real inspector though? Frankie asked, suddenly thinking about him. Robin, Usopp, and Zoro all laughed at that as Usopp said that the real Agent Shepard was found in the hall and thought to be one of the Straw Hats and was thrown down into the dungeons with him and Zoro. He then lied and said that Shepard was their crewmate, Condoriano. Where'd you come up with Condoriano? Frankie asked as they all laughed with him. It just came to me. He offered as they all wiped the tears of laughter away. Oh, but that was great, you should have seen the look on his face. Finally, the next memory appeared and they were in what looked like a dining hall. Luffy was on the floor, dressed in kitchen garb, with a man towering over him. He had a rather laid-back expression with orange hair and black eyebrows and mustache. Who's that? Chopper asked in surprise. That would be Commander Jonathan, Robin answered. Ah, so he's the head honcho around here? Frankie asked. Straw Hat Luffy, Jonathan said politely, I would rather not resort to violence in the dining hall, so please be civil. Just answer me one question if you will be so kind. If I answer, can I split that food with you? Luffy asked as he looked behind him to see the plate of meatballs there. If you answer the question, you can have all of it, Jonathan answered agreeably. Really? Luffy asked happily, his hand stretching out to grab it and brought it back to him. You got a deal. Sorry I called you a jerk. You moron, Sanji sighed, you should have just gotten out of there. He was the one who blew our cover. Funny, I was under the impression that you were the one that got you both in the kitchen in the first place, Robin asked him and Sanji froze. Probably fawning over this Jessica lady, Usopp nodded. Too bad that she's married to Jonathan here, Robin laughed and Sanji sighed. He's got to be the luckiest man in the world, he said enviously. No matter how hard I try, I can't figure out your purpose here, Jonathan went on as Luffy enjoyed the meatballs. I am certain that Captain Smoker is the one who defeated Crocodile in Alabasta. Oh, that is just bullshit, Zoro said rolling his eye. It doesn't surprise me that the Marines try to make it sound like they took care of Crocodile when they didn't do a thing about it, Robin said. After all, Crocodile, who was an approved pirate by the government, almost ended up toppling Alabasta, and he wasn't stopped by them, but by a band of wanted pirates. They just couldn't take the embarrassment. I heard that Smoker was given the official credit, but he refused the promotion and everything else that they offered him. Better that than to live a lie, Sanji said firmly. Smokey's a lot of things, but he's at least honorable. I think he'd rather leave the Marines in disgrace than to be giving a reward for nothing. Your shenanigans resulted in no discernible gain, Jonathan went on, they acquired you neither fame nor fortune. Your motives remain a mystery and I want to know why it is you came to Navarone of all places. Easy, Luffy answered as he finished the food, we fell from the sky. This was just where we landed. That's what I said to those stupid lieutenants who came down to interrogate me, Zoro nodded, it's not my fault that they didn't believe me. To be fair, you don't expect pirates to be falling out of the sky, Nami told him as the commander looked startled by the blunt honesty in Luffy's voice and watched as he got up from the floor. Here in the Grand Line it's one crazy thing after another, Luffy smiled, I gotta say I'm really starting to enjoy this fortress. The food here is great. That would be my food he's talking about, Sanji said proudly. Wow, then the food here must have really been shit if you were their best cook, Zoro said as Sanji threw another kick at him, which Zoro blocked. Would you stop for 5 minutes? Nami snapped. Commander Jonathan chuckled suddenly and they all looked up to see that he was smiling. You should know that even with the power of the devil's fruit, one would find that escape from our charming little fortress is impossible. It would take nothing short of a miracle. He smirked at Luffy and added, checkmate. I know that he's the enemy, but I have to say that I like this guy a lot better than most of the morons you guys get stuck with, Frankie said thoughtfully, at least he's got a sense of humor. Yo-ho-ho-ho, I think that you're right, Brook said. He wasn't such a bad guy the first suppose, Nami agreed, in fact, I remember him offering us a deal that if Luffy and Zoro surrendered themselves, he'd let the rest of us go free since we didn't have bounties on our heads. What? Brook asked in surprise. Which we refused naturally, Usopp said at once. But I have to say that we narrowly escaped prison because of him. He was really good, but I gotta say, I think that the Marines should have more guys like him in charge. I'll leave when I'm good and ready, Mr. Commander, Luffy said with a laugh and a grin. I doubt you'll talk so tough when you hear we've captured Zoro, Jonathan informed him. The smirk faded and he looked alarmed at that. Zoro, he repeated in surprise. The enjoyment seemed to disappear as he stood tall and asked, Fortress guy, where Zoro was. Why do you ask? Jonathan asked, still sounding polite. Well, why do you think? Luffy asked, and finally, he sounded angry, so that I can find him and rescue my friend. Nice to know he cares, Zoro said, but I was doing just fine. They just put me behind bars, they didn't even put me in chains or anything. I caught up on some sleep, it was dull as hell. They had guns pointed at us. Usopp yelled at him. Don't be so hasty, Jonathan said calmly, you'll be joining the swordsmen soon enough, I'll make sure of that. And when he stepped forward, the step seemed to shake the room. Luffy looked ready to fight until the door behind him opened and Sanji appeared, grabbing Luffy by the scruff of his neck and pulled him back quickly into the room behind them. They walked through the walls to see Memory Sanji pull Luffy up. You blew our cover, we gotta get out of here. He hissed to him and they were starting to run, but a beautiful woman and several cooks all appeared, each holding a pot, rolling pin, or anything else that you could find in the kitchen. This sorta reminds me of the Bharati, Nami said in surprise, I bet you felt at home here, Sanji. It was a little nostalgic, Sanji nodded, but these guys had nothing on the Bharati. Though I gotta say that I'm glad that we were able to get out without hurting Jessica. I never would have been able to forgive myself if that happened. His past self stared at her worriedly as she said darkly, a hint of regret in her tone, such a shame that someone with skills like yours wastes their life as a filthy straw hat pirate. Give up while you can, pirates. One of the cooks yelled, the cooks of Navarone are even tougher than the soldiers. Memory Sanji just smirked. Bring it on, he said, I come from cooks that make you look like schoolgirls playing house. True, very true, current Sanji said proudly. His past self looked at Jessica worriedly, but the doors opened behind them and Jonathan was there. They were outnumbered and surrounded. But just then the doors to the side opened up and a flood of Marines came in, looking for food. That's a lucky break, Robin answered as Memory Sanji and Luffy were able to use this as a way to escape, bursting through the crowd, and Luffy even called back that he'd see the commander around later as they hurried off. This is a dangerous game you guys are playing, Brook said, after all, you're in the middle of enemy territory, but it's like you're running around the base like you own it. If they know you're afraid, then they'll use that against you, Sanji said as the memory faded around them. We knew that they had Moss Head, and while we were running around the hallways, we overheard that they also had Usopp. I knew that they had to be in the brig, but finding it was the hard part. This place was huge and finding anyone in this place was almost impossible. In the next memory they were standing next to the side of a large bridge and they looked up to see a flight of stairs. Out of a doorway, an old man in an orange jumpsuit came out and walked down the stairs. It's Mekau, Usopp said happily. The old shipwright you were talking about? Frankie asked curiously. Yeah, Usopp nodded, he came down to give me some advice to how to properly care for a ship. Why? Nami asked in surprise. Well, when I came looking for the Mary, he said that he could tell that she was really loved, Usopp said softly. He thought that all ships should be cared for. The Marines keep destroying their battleships after all. Yeah, I can respect that, Frankie nodded. She was a mess and falling apart when I first saw her. But anyone can tell that she was really treasured. I wish I had a chance to meet Lam Chan, Brook said sadly. Her name is Mary, Usopp said as Memory Sanji whispered that he didn't like it. Something was fishy about this place, but he was sure that's where the others were. Well, let's do it. Luffy decided as he got ready to charge in. Hold on a minute, Memory Sanji told him sharply, let's think things through. He looked to the bridge and told him that the path they took to get here was completely unguarded, like the Marines were going out of their way to show them where their friends were, which could only mean one thing. A trap, Nami frowned. I know, Luffy decided, the boss of this fortress is a nice guy. Memory Sanji was subtle in his answer, in that he kicked him against the rock. Think he got the message? Nami asked them as they all had mixed reactions to hearing that answer. Anywhere from laughter to exasperation. They're planning to ambush us. Memory Sanji snapped before he looked back to the door. If anything, it saves time for those jerks, we'd be literally walking into a jail cell. So what are we waiting for? Luffy asked, battered and bruised from the kick. So it's a trap, big deal. We won't be getting any rescuing down unless we go in there. Good point, there really wasn't much choice at this point, Robin answered, the longer that we stayed here, the more we were pushing our luck. They had countless Marines on their side and we were out of our element. We didn't even have Mary, we had to leave this place as soon as possible. I won't complain about that, Chopper nodded as past Sanji thought about the plan of just barging in. He said that he didn't think it was a good idea, but it was better than not doing anything. And he knew that they needed to leave as soon as possible as well. Sanji, it's not such a bad idea, Luffy said. You're kidding right? Nami whispered, it was a very bad idea. Yes, it is, Memory Sanji hissed, but suddenly they charged off together. But you like it huh? Luffy asked knowingly. No, I don't, he retorted angrily as they ran up the stairs and after cautiously looking through the door, they went running off with Luffy in the front yelling out for Zoro and Usopp. I know that I wasn't there, Frankie said, but something tells me that running around and yelling isn't the best option. No, but hey, what else could we do at that point? Sanji shrugged. We rescued them, so I say that it was a success. Just then they heard Usopp's voice calling from somewhere down another flight of stairs. Hey Luffy. Down here. But then he seemed to change his mind, no turn back. Finally he decided, rescue us if you want to. What's going on? Chopper asked him, didn't you want them to save you? Of course I did, Usopp panted as he ran along, but they had an ambush waiting for them down here. I didn't know what to say. They followed them down to the end of a long passage, and there they found them. Usopp and Zoro were behind bars, their hands tied by boards behind them. Usopp's bag and Zoro's swords were in the cell next to them. I still can't believe that they caught you both, Brook called as Usopp cried to Luffy to be careful. Found them, Luffy said happily as he grabbed the bars. Hold on. We'll get you outta, his voice died in his throat as he slowly seemed to melt against the bars, his energy leaving him, and Usopp cried out in horror as he realized what the problem was. See, prism stone bars. But they weren't alone like they said, there were several battalions of men on either side, blocking them all off. Even Memory Sanji was looking worried at the number. It was funny considering how strong they had all become now, and were worried about bunch of weaklings like them in these days. In desperation, he began kicking away at the bars, but they didn't even shake as the soldiers told him that it wasn't going to take anything short of a cannon to break those bars. Memory Usopp then told Sanji to reach into his pocket for an impact dial. Looking hesitant about that, Sanji did what he was told, making a point to try and warn the men. But when he pressed down on it, it was a tone dial. They could hear Usopp's voice in that, and the men all started to laugh as Sanji turned as red as a tomato in embarrassment. I'm still going to kill you for that, current Sanji hissed to Usopp, who blushed this time. Sorry, he muttered as past Sanji stood up and gave the Marines a death glare, snarling, shut up or I'll gut you. He said it in such a way that there was no way that was just a bluff, that shut all of them up, believing what he said and didn't say anything else. You're scary here, Frankie said as Chopper hid behind Zoro, shaking in fear. Memory Sanji looked ready to kill Usopp, but the next dial that he took turned out to be an odor dial, and they found out that Luffy had stored his farts in there because he thought it'd be a funny joke. That is disgusting, Nami yelled. However gross it was though, it did the job. It ended up igniting from the torches that hung on the walls and it blew everything up around them. Wow, didn't see that coming, Brook called happily. Aw, were you all alright? Don't worry, nothing bad, Zoro said with an indifferent shrug. His past self hadn't moved an inch from where he had been sitting as Memory Sanji pulled himself out of the rubble. Hey, you guys okay? He yelled in worry. Past Usopp was a mess, his eyes rolled back and badly burnt as he croaked out, mission accomplished. Barely. It almost ended up killing you all. Nami yelled as Memory Zoro pulled the boards holding his hands apart. The past version of Sanji freed Usopp from his own boards, almost smashing his hands before they heard Luffy croak out, help, me. Luffy was trapped underneath the bars and Sanji sighed. Every time I turn around, he muttered before he bent down and heaved the heavy bars off him. That had to be miserable, Robin answered, knowing how awful Sea Stone was. She rubbed her wrists, remembering the helpless feeling of being unable to do anything. Is it really that bad for you guys? Current Usopp asked her in worry. He had always been curious about how Sea Stone affected Devil Fruit users. Well, you don't have the same fear as when you fall into the ocean, she answered, because we have no fear of drowning. However, she trailed off as Chopper and Brook seemed nervous. What's it like? Nami asked curiously. We can't use our powers, we feel so weak and helpless, she sighed. Imagine swimming for an entire day. I suppose, you'd be exhausted, wouldn't you? We can move, but just barely. It's like having heavy weights tied directly to your skin. That's what the sea, and Sea Prism Stone, does to Devil Fruit users. That does sound bad, Frankie said sympathetically. And that is why I'll never eat one. Same here, Zoro and Sanji both nodded, even though the latter had once had a desire to eat one. After Sanji got Luffy up, Memory Zoro heaved a boulder that had been on top of his swords, and then threw Usopp his bag of tricks. Well, he called once he put his swords back to his hip, no point in staying around. Let's get outta here. Let's go, Luffy, past Sanji smirked and Luffy beamed after he dusted himself off. Right, he cheered, everybody run. And that's what they did. They took off like a flash with Usopp shouting behind them that they shouldn't let Zoro lead because he'd get them all lost. They laughed a little as the memory faded. Sad thing is, we did get lost, Sanji said. You what? Chopper asked in surprise. How do you get lost going to the door? That's what I want to know, Sanji said thoughtfully as Zoro glared at him. Oh, would you just shut up? He hissed as the memory appeared and they were outside on the edge of a cliff overlooking the rest of the base. Ah great, Memory Zoro groaned, a dead end. No, Luffy called, pointing down to a walkway that connected to their ledge, we can run along this cliff here. But before they could head down there, gunfire came and the 3 straw hats who weren't bulletproof dodged behind some rocks as they looked up to see Jonathan there with one of the lieutenants who had them cornered back in the brig, standing on a balcony just above them. "So you've finally shown yourselves, EH?" Jonathan asked calmly. "He doesn't seem surprised that you all escaped," Brooke said in surprise as they heard Memory, Usopp and Sanji mutter that it was the base commander. "Hey, Fortress guy," Luffy said happily, "why are you up there?" "This is the balcony to my office," he answered casually as Luffy jumped up to another rock so that he could get a better look, with Memory Usopp warning him not to do it. "My crew. I rescued them. What do you think?" Luffy asked him, and he smiled when Jonathan looked impressed. "Sorry I beat your guys up," Luffy went on, though he didn't sound too sorry, "but I told you that I was gonna leave when I wanted to, didn't I?" This whole thing was like a dare to him, Sanji stated as he watched. When someone tells him that it can't be done, Zoro said knowingly, Luffy just takes that as a challenge. The commander said that it can't be done, but he wants to prove that he can do it. "Indeed," Jonathan answered, "do you still intend to do that, Straw Hat Luffy?" "Leave? Yep, we're leaving right now," Luffy answered happily and Jonathan laughed good-naturedly. "You're funny," he smiled. "Do you actually think you can escape from Navarone? With your treasure?" Nami's eyes twitched at that as the memory faded with Luffy said confidently, "You bet I do. We're pirates. You guys can't catch us." Just then they heard the sounds of a cannon going off and the memory disappeared. "What happened?" Chopper asked worriedly. "They fired on us," Zoro said in a bored tone. "They had terrible aim though. I had a feeling that was you," Robin stated, remembering the rush of Marines running around and the explosions in the distance. She smiled, knowing that it could have only been the boys. She was just surprised that they remained quiet for so long. "I know," Nami sighed as the memory came back and they were all suddenly back on the Mary and sailing unusually close to the wall. "Whoa, what happened?" Brooke asked in confusion. "How'd we get back here so soon?" "I guess parts of the memory skipped," Usopp said before he quickly told them that they escaped and were heading to the docks to where he'd seen the Mary. When they tried to cross the bridge connecting the mountain in the middle to the cliffs, they were attacked by a tough group of Marines before Luffy broke about part of the bridge and they all fell into the bay. "He just never thinks about the consequences of his actions," Sanji sighed in annoyance before he almost fainted in joy over Memory Nami in her bright pink nurse's outfit. "Wow, Nami-san," Brooke gasped out, "you look amazing. Would you mind letting me see your panties?" Nami's natural response was to kick his head right into the ground. "Ow," Frankie winced before he looked to Nami and asked how she got there. She sighed, shooting Brooke another annoyed look before she explained that while they were in the medical ward Dr. Kabato found out that they were pirates. But she was so grateful to them for helping her, and to Chopper giving her the confidence to be a doctor, she decided to help them find their ship and even pretended to be their hostage. At that point they all headed straight towards Dock 88, but when they got there it turned out that Jonathan had already predicted what they would do and they had at least half the Marines in G8 there waiting for them. Luffy ended up getting trapped in a net of sea stone, but they used Nami and Dr. Kabato as their hostages to get on board and Mekao, who happened to be Kabato's father, decided to release the Mary into the water. "Why would he do that?" Brooke asked in surprise. "Well, I never did found out why," Usopp said, "but I guess, he just wanted to help us. I guess he took a liking to us." Sanji laughed a little as he added that the Marines were able to grab Kabato, but since Nami was dressed like a nurse when the rest of them got to the ship, the Marines thought that they still had a hostage and let them go. "That explains it," Brooke said as Memory Zoro was asking the others in an annoyed voice why they were hugging the base of the cliff with Nami snapping back that they needed protection. They'd have cannons blasting them from both sides if they went straight down the middle. Memory Usopp, who apparently had been knocked out, was coming to and Luffy happily explained how they escaped. As they talked, they looked to Memory Sanji who was lovesick over Nami as she stared around, trying to figure out what to do. "Well, we escaped," she said, "but what good are we without maps or charts? We were way better off with you guys in jail. What are we gonna do now?" "That's cold," Frankie winced. "Well, what could we do?" she asked before Memory Sanji was staring up above them happily. "Robin," he cried and they all looked up to see that past Robin had created a rope of arms and was swinging down towards them, a pair of sunglasses glinting in the light. "Now there's a girl with style." Memory Sanji cried out. "You couldn't have arrived at a better time," Current Nami told her. "Looks like we can always count on you." Current Robin laughed. "I'm just glad that I could help." Her past self landed on the deck and greeted them all, and she truly sounded glad to see them as she handed a map of the fortress to Nami who beamed at her, looking ready to cry. They had a chance to escape, and not a moment too soon for cannonballs were flying around at them. "I think they're done playing around here," Chopper called worriedly, having forgot about this part. "They're shooting at us," Luffy called. "I thought they weren't going to attack us because we had a hostage." Past Usopp yelled, but Memory Nami didn't seem surprised as she called, "We knew it was only going to be a matter of time." It wouldn't have been hard for them to realize their nurse staff was all accounted for, present-day Nami nodded. They turned the rudder and were now heading full speed in the direction Memory Nami pointed, 3 battleships giving chase. They continued sailing onwards until she showed them the exit. "Yeah," Frankie cheered. "We're getting out of here. So long G8. It's been real. I wouldn't get ahead of myself here," Zoro muttered as past Nami called out the giant steel door was their only way out. And that they had to break through that gate. But then Usopp ran back up the deck and yelled that they had a problem, all their cannonballs were gone. "Those stupid Marines dare to call pirates thieves," the present Nami said angrily. "Did they know how hard we had to work for all that?" "Wait," Brook said softly, slowly realizing that if they took the cannonballs, then did that mean that they also took all their? "You're kidding me." Past Nami yelled down at him in shock, "We don't have a single cannonball." "Not a one," he told her regretfully, "no explosives of any kind. Not even the boxes they came in. Doesn't matter, it was going to take a lot more than our one cannon to do any kind of damage to that door anyway," current Zoro added. "Well, that's hardly surprising," past Robin reasoned, considering they confiscated the Going Merry. "What do we do?" Usopp cried out to them in fear, "We can't bust through that gate without some serious firepower." But Luffy had that covered for them. They watched as cannons from the gatehouse were fired directly at them and Luffy jumped up as he inflated himself and caught the cannonballs, hitting the sail for a moment before he was able to send them flying back in at the gate, which blew up in a massive fireball, and thick, black smoke billowed everywhere. "Well, that's problem solved." Frankie cheered out as Chopper jumped up and down. That was even better than seeing it the first time. He cried happily as past Nami told Luffy that he did a great job and they should sail out of here. But as they entered the black smoke, thinking they were in the clear, they heard Nami let out a loud, piercing scream as if she had her arm chopped off. "What's wrong?" Brook cried out in shock as they looked back to see her running down from the upper deck into the door where the storage was and threw it open. She stood there frozen for a few minutes as Usopp asked what was wrong. She stared in horror at the empty room before she cried out, "We've been had. My treasure. Oh, they took all your gold." Frankie yelled over the noise and the black smoke got even darker and they realized that the memory was fading, with Nami's voice echoing across the memory to turn back and get their gold. "You were willing to risk your life for that gold?" Brook asked. "You saw what we had to go through for that stuff," she retorted. "And we needed it. We could put that gold to a lot better use than those Marines. What was the point in leaving without all our hard-earned gold?" "We needed it. Yeah, but you were almost killed here." Brook pointed out, "What good is gold if you're dead?" "Hey, since when do pirates turn their backs on gold?" she demanded. "Look, we got out of the smoke and hid in one of the abandoned docks so that we could figure out what we were going to do." The next memory appeared at her words and they were all back in the cabin of the Mary, most of them sitting at the table and looking at Nami as Sanji went looking for any food that they had left over that wasn't taken by Marines. "Just so I understand you correctly, Memory," Nami asked them, "you guys are okay with us leaving this place without our gold?" "It was too bad, but at the end of the day, I still believe that our lives are more important," current Usopp added. "But without it, we wouldn't be on the Sunny now, would we?" she asked, and as Brook looked puzzled, Frankie suddenly realized where all that money went to. He suddenly started to sweat nervously. As their past selves all nodded to Nami, who sighed. "Well, that's too bad," she said with a smug look, "'cause you know pirate treasure is always divided up. Even after splitting up the loot, we'd still have more gold than we'd know what to do with. Just think of all the stuff we could have bought." That was logic I couldn't argue with, Usopp sighed with a nod. That got everyone's attention, and soon they were talking excitedly about the things they wanted to buy. But then Nami added that one member was going to take an extra cut, 8%. Naturally, they all thought she was talking about herself, and even Sanji was looking angry at that until she answered that it wasn't for her but it was for a special lady. She smiled at them and informed them all that they were going to set aside the gold to pay for the repairs they desperately needed to make. "A lady," Luffy repeated in confusion, before he understood. "Oh, wait, you mean the Mary?" "That's right," she said, "isn't it about time we pay her back for all she's done for us?" "That's true," Brook said softly, but it's already too late for this old girl," Frankie sighed. "The damage is just too much for her. In fact, if I didn't know how special she was here, I'd be amazed that she's still floating." "Special," Brook repeated in confusion as all the Straw Hats held expressions of grief and loss. "This was before we found out how broken she was," Nami sighed sadly. "But with all that gold, I thought for sure that we'd." "It's not that we don't love the Sunny," Chopper sniffled, rubbing his hoof over his blue nose. "But Mary, she was one of a kind," Usopp said, looking back up with tears burning at his eyes. "She was as much a crewmate as any of us, and she was the greatest ship in the world." No one bothered to correct him, all of them feeling the same way. In Frankie's case, she was the best, but now the Sunny was there to take that role and carry on her will. Brook was lost. He knew that the Mary was special to them all, but they were all acting like she was a living thing. Though even as he looked at the battered and worn walls of the cabin, he couldn't help but feel the same, as though this ship was another friend, looking out for them all. Once again, he lamented the fact that he was the last crew member to join, and the only one who hadn't met the Mary. After the past Straw Hats all talked it over, and thought of all that Mary had gone through for them, they realized that Nami was right. She had been there for them since Usopp left his home in the East Blue, gone over Reverse Mountain, flew up to Sky Island, and Chopper even risked his life for her when he was attacked back in the upper yard. Past Usopp nodded, adding that they shouldn't forget that mysterious someone fixed the ship for them. When he noticed that they were all looking at him funny, he yelled out, "I saw somebody." "I swear, did you ever figure out who it had been?" Brook asked them curiously. "Yeah," Zoro said softly. "Though it seems impossible, we were able to thank them for all they did for us." "But," Brook began, but Frankie shook his head. "No, you'll see." Brook was feeling frustrated, but didn't say anything else to it as Luffy said, "When you think about it, this ship's gone through a lot for us. And that's exactly why we need to give her some tender loving care." Memory Nami added gently as her present self couldn't help but feel a sense of pain at the thought of knowing that their TLC came too late. "Good idea," Past Usopp said, in full agreement. "The Going Merry's great repair. Let's do it." Luffy agreed as well. "It's settled," Past Nami said, glad that they were all on the same page now, "and since we don't know how much the repairs will be," Nami went on, "we'll just hold off dividing up the treasure until we do." Past Sanji came over with a plate of leftovers that he was able to scrape together of what was left of the food as they talked more about how they were wondering how much longer Usopp's repairs were gonna last. Usopp rolled his eyes and snapped at them for the millionth time that he wasn't a shipwright. But he agreed that Mekau said the same thing before, it needed professional repairs. But then Luffy seemed to realize something. "That's it," Luffy said suddenly standing up. "We gotta get a shipwright for our crew. Our journey is far from over, right?" They nodded. "We really need someone with those skills." They nodded again, "And the Mary isn't just our ship. She's our home too. So let's go find a shipwright who can keep the Mary safe." The memory faded after that. "So I guess that means that the Super Me is going to be coming into these memories at long last?" Frankie asked eagerly. "Yeah, it was still a couple weeks before we got to Water 7 though, and a lot happened between then, but yeah, I'm guessing that you're gonna show up finally," Zoro said. "Of course, we sure didn't start off as friends now, did we?" Frankie laughed awkwardly and rubbed the back of his head in embarrassment. "Yeah, but hey, it all worked out in the end, didn't it?" "Really? What happened?" Brook asked curiously. "When we first met him, he and his thugs stole more than half of our money from us," Nami said, her eyes narrowed in danger, and Frankie held up his hands in surrender. "What?" Brook cried in shock. "Now to be fair," Frankie said quickly, "I thought that you were just a bunch of low-life pirates who stole that money. If I had known what you had to go through for it, I'd never have touched it. But it all worked out, didn't it?" "Just, shut up," Nami said angrily as the memories came back. "I don't want to talk to you right now. Just be happy that she's not beating you up for that," Usopp whispered to him, which Frankie nodded. Truthfully, while he wanted to see himself finally come into the scene, he wasn't looking forward to see those old wounds reopen. He could only hope that they were over quick, and to stay out of Nami's reach in case she decided to beat him up. They were next seen standing in a dark base, one of the abandoned docks that they mentioned before, and the first thing they saw was that the Mary was covered in paper, paint, and plywood so that it looked like a marine battleship that a 3-year-old drew. "What's that?" Frankie asked as they all laughed. "We thought that we needed to disguise the Mary just to be on the safe side in case anyone came here," Usopp laughed. Their past selves were all starting to head off, looking ready to get their gold back, when Memory Usopp suddenly called out behind them, "Hey! Wait a minute." They all looked back, asking what the matter was. "We can't just rush off like this," he said, "shouldn't we come up with some kind of plan first?" They all looked at each other and he sighed. "Oh great," he sighed, "we're off to a successful start. Don't you think those Marines will notice 7 people sneaking around their fortress? I'm surprised, normally you all at least try to think of a plan before it all goes wrong," Yohohoho, Brook teased. "No one was really thinking, I suppose," Robin laughed. She hadn't even realized just how comfortable and part of the crew that she had become here. She supposed that they were both a good, and a bad, influence on her. Past Usopp sat down and they pulled out the map of the basin. They all began to talk about their plan, after he yelled at Nami, asking what happened to the waiver. He then took the map of the fortress and they all gathered around him as he began to explain it. He explained that the gold recovery team would consist of himself, Luffy, Zoro, and Robin. While Nami and Sanji were to go and get the waiver recovery team with Chopper standing guard over the ship. Chopper looked ready to cry at that. Possibly bad memories of the last time he stood watch over the Mary coming back to him. "You were the one who had the easiest and safest job. I don't know what you were complaining about," Zoro said. Chopper blushed. "It's just, if I was attacked in a creepy old base by myself, I wouldn't have been able to fight them all off. But you did your part, and we were glad that nothing happened," Nami told him, and he blushed a little bit redder. "Oh, be quiet. I don't know why you all keep trying to flatter me because it never works." He danced around a little as Memory Usopp used a little flattery to reassure him that he'd be fine, and they all got up, ready to go. The gold recovery team was to move by land and take the shortest route to the vault, while the waiver recovery team were to take a patched-up boat across the bay to where Nami hid the waiver. They were then to meet back here once they got their things. After that, they were to make a daring escape. All in all, it was a good plan, Usopp-san, Brook agreed. But did it all work? Well, we got the waiver back pretty much according to plan, Nami said, thinking back as the memory shifted. But when we got back to the Mary, we found out that the others weren't back yet. If the gold was where we thought it was, maybe, Robin answered, but the vault that we thought the gold was in was empty. What happened? Frankie asked as she quickly explained that Commander Jonathan tricked them into another ambush, this one in a huge room that was locked from the outside. With countless Marines, things looked bad until the real Agent Shepard opened the door and gave them the chance to escape. Why? Frankie asked slowly. He was an idiot, Zoro answered in an unconcerned voice, and they nodded. He wanted the credit for taking us out, but instead, he ended up helping us out big time. That's just funny, Frankie said as Brook laughed. Condoriano is a real laugh, Usopp laughed. Anyway, long story short, we ran into Nami and she figured that the gold was in the commander's office, so they went to go get it while we went back to the Mary. At those words, they were back in the G8 base with Luffy and Nami on the waiver, and Luffy struggling to stay on with the gold weighing them down. Luffy, Nami screamed, do you see the Mary out there anywhere? It's so dark, I can't see anything, Luffy answered before he spotted their ship in front of him, and he warned Nami to be careful of the battleship, but she just smiled as they spotted Usopp in the mast, waving a light over at them. You know, in the dark, it does look like a warship, current Nami laughed as she watched their past selves greet them and pull them on board with their things. With everything and everyone accounted for, they were finally ready to break out of here for good. They followed behind several other marine ships, headed up and snuck behind them. When the tip of their ship hit theirs, it shattered into pieces and the Mary burst through. Luffy, on the bow, full speed ahead Mary. Yeah, oh, that was a dirty trick. Frankie roared with laughter. We're pirates, remember? Robin reminded him with a smile, and Chopper laughed happily. Thank you for showing us where the currents are. Past Nami called, sitting calmly on the side of the ship past the battleship, we couldn't have made it this far without you. We owe you one. Usopp laughed from the mast, next to Robin, thanks you guys. Now that's adding insult to injury. Brook laughed happily. Now we get to see you all escape. Again, don't get your hopes up, Zoro said. What? Frankie asked startled, what did you forget now? We didn't forget anything, they had one last trick up their sleeve for us, Sanji sighed. It turns out that when the tide goes out of this place, the lake becomes so shallow that Nami began, but they saw what happened firsthand. The water receded, and they were suddenly stranded on a reef with a giant hole in the Mary's side. With no water, they were stuck in the mud while the Marines were given time to mobilize. Luffy fell over the side, and believed that he was drowning until he noticed that the water was practically gone. Oh, this isn't good, Frankie frowned, there's no way that the Going Mary can sail with a hole like that in her side. Well, good thing that we didn't sail out then, Sanji muttered softly. On the bright side, past Robin said, the water's so low we don't have to worry about the ship sinking until the next high tide. That's true, but we can't escape either. Memory Nami cried out in fear. But soon the lights came on like spotlights once again, and there were cannons pointing at them. Oh, hell, Frankie said, out of the frying pan and into the fire. Over a loudspeaker they heard Commander Jonathan's voice calling out to them. Attention Straw Hat Luffy and his fellow crewmates. They all looked up. All of you have fought valiantly against one of the Marines' greatest fortresses. And for that I salute you. You may be the enemy, but you've impressed me greatly. However, it's time we end this game. This is checkmate. You've got nowhere to run and don't even think of trying to escape. You've put up a good fight, but accept it. You've been beaten. Not yet, we haven't. Present day Usopp yelled as Chopper hollered loudly in agreement as Luffy stood up, lowering his hat over his eyes. Now then, Jonathan's voice went on, surrender, and as commander of this fortress, you have my word, you and your crew will be treated with the utmost respect. Give up quietly and I'll even make you a deal. I have to say that I believed him here, Zoro said, not that we were going to do it, but I've got the feeling that he wasn't lying. He certainly seems like a good man, Brook said softly, but I'm glad to hear that you didn't listen. Memory Nami was looking scared as she looked to Luffy, where a dark smile was curling on his mouth. Did you believe that he was going to go through with it? Robin asked curiously. To be honest, I wasn't sure what he was going to do, she said, but she didn't go on. If Luffy thought that it was the only way to save the rest of the crew, she knew that he would have gone through with it, and that scared her more than anything else. Luffy, she thought worriedly, I hope that we get you back soon, it's just not the same without you. And I want to give you a piece of my mind for all these stupid stunts of yours. You and Rorano Azoro are the only Straw Hats with bounties on your heads, so I have no choice but to hand you over to headquarters. Jonathan went on, however, I promise to let the rest of your crew go free. But if you attempt another escape, I'll get mad. The only ones with bounties. What about you, Robin? Chopper asked in confusion. Well, I'm guessing that by this point, they didn't know that I was part of the crew just yet, she said with a shrug. I can't say that I'm surprised. Fair enough, Sanji offered with a shrug. But you think that all the Marine losers who had been chasing us would have seen such a beautiful lady with us? Probably for the best, Robin answered, feeling a great sense of relief that her crew hadn't been put into danger because of her just yet. The Straw Hats were all in a tough spot here. No matter what way you looked at it, they didn't have much choice here. But because of their adventure on Skypia, they had a few tricks up their sleeves as well. Memory Usopp pulled out an impact dial, telling them that he used it while they were escaping and had a lot of attacks stored up in it. He was sure that they could use it to blast out of here, and Robin suggested that they use the same octopus they used to leave Skypia to float out of here, which Luffy pulled out of his pants. Ah, why did he have that thing in his pants? Brook asked in surprise as Robin burst out laughing once again. I never did understand that, Sanji sighed. What an idiot. Well, it's a good thing that he was able to keep the octopus safe, Robin chuckled. And he was also the one with the flame dial as well. And after some shouting, he pulled out the very same dial, confessing that he had been playing with it in the kitchen. He does have his uses, I guess, Sanji shrugged. Memory Usopp then held up the impact dial, muttering about who fire it, and they all gave him a rather evil wood look. It was only fair to let the owner do it. You look like you were going to eat him here, Frankie said, noticing the dark shine in each of their eyes as they made Usopp do it, and he screamed in horror. Why did I have to use it? Usopp whimpered, that thing hurts like hell. But you saved us, Usopp, Nami offered with a devious smile. It wasn't so bad, was it? Then why didn't you do it? He demanded. She's too gorgeous to do something like that, Sanji said lovingly, and she smiled back at him, and he almost fell over in bliss as Usopp rolled his eyes. They owed him big time for that. So the men took Usopp below deck to where the hole was, supported his arms and shoulders, or holding him there since they weren't given him a choice, and he ended up thrashing around once he realized what he was doing. But they counted down, and with an explosion they could feel the ship being dragged across the ground and lift off into the sky as they were flung backwards and hit the wall painfully. That had to hurt. Chopper winced as they crashed, remembering how he had to treat them all after that escape. Come on, we're getting out of there. Frankie cheered as Luffy looked down at the hole and they could see the water coming up closer, and he cried that they were falling. They heard Chopper yelling at Robin to get the octopus, and Luffy ran up to the deck in time to see that Robin had used her powers to stretch the creature out and they were now inflating it with air. They followed him up in time to see Memory Nami screaming at him to use the flame dial, which he then joined the girls, flames and air both being blown, and the octopus was quickly growing. They were all pleading with the octopus, telling it to fly. Come on, you can do it. Brook cheered on with them, and they did it. The octopus had grown up to full size and were suddenly flying upwards, heading to the cliff just as the first rays of sun could be seen over the wall. Yeah, we did it, Luffy yelled joyfully. As he got Chopper down from the balloon, a large cannonball came flying from the ground and hit the cannons that were aimed at them. What were they shooting at? Current Usopp cried out in shock, never understanding what happened. Bad aim, Zoro asked, but it didn't matter. Whatever happened, it helped them out. They managed to make it up the cliff and finally over it so that they could see the open sea. They all beamed happily, staring at the beautiful sunrise. Frankie was laughing his head off. Dude, I could only imagine the looks on their faces when they saw you flying off. That was classic. Maybe we should work on a balloon for the Sunny just in case. Chopper asked eagerly, and Frankie thought that over. Not a bad idea, he said. Tell y'all what, once we get back to the Sunny, I'll look her over and see what I can do. Really? Usopp and Chopper beamed at him, their eyes glowing. That would be so cool. Chopper said in wonder, and Frankie struck a pose as they cheered. The others just smiled at that scene as the sunrise memory faded and they were left back in the dead of night, all of them starting to grow very tired from everything they've seen. No one said anything else as they politely waited for the memories to come back. The next thing they knew was that they were still on the Mary. The sun had long since gone down, but they were still flying through the air with the octo balloon. Looks like you guys were up in the air for a long time, Brook said, looking in wonder at the sight. All day and most of the night, Sanji confirmed. We decided to go on for as long as we could. Usopp had a few flame dials and we decided to just leave it to fate where we fell. So long as it wasn't in another marine base, I could live with it, Nami said. And with the breath dials we had helped us to control our course, so it wasn't hard. It was actually a really good time. All day in the air, truly the only way to travel. Usopp sighed dreamily as they heard hammering below and glanced down to see that Memory Usopp and Chopper were both dangling from ropes over the side of the Mary and patched up the holes. But as they watched, the flame dial that they attached to the mast to keep the balloon going had gone out. Luffy gave a sharp intact of breath. It's out, he said. Memory Zoro, who was sleeping, looked up, fuel burnt out huh. And at once the octopus began to lose height. Hey, Usopp, he called, going down. At his words, the two climbed up the side and made it on board just as the ship landed with a crash on the water. Though not as violent as their first landing, it was still hard. The octopus was back to its small size, and Chopper was treating the small burns that it obtained from the fire. After Chopper reassured it that it would be fine, Luffy picked it up and gave it a hug. That's 2 times now you helped us out of a real tight spot. He then threw him overboard. Thanks buddy. It stuck its head back out and began to wave a tentacle at them in farewell. Everyone all said goodbye and thanked it for all it did for them. You guys are the only ones I know who would want to thank an octopus, Frankie laughed, but I'm glad you let him go. If he stuck around, Luffy may have wanted to eat him. Maybe, but after he helped us out like that, I doubt it. Zoro laughed a little as the octopus gave one last little wave before he ducked under the water and disappeared. Luffy beamed as he jumped everyone to attention. Well then, he said to them all excitedly, set the sails. Hop to. Let's find the next island. Whoa, hold on Luffy. Memory Usopp said tiredly, can't we rest for a little while? I don't know about you, but I was already wanting something interesting to happen, Zoro said as he watched them. Hey, it was non-stop action ever since we left for Sky Island. He reminded him, everyone was tired. Give me a break. Surprisingly, it was Memory Nami who spoke up. You're a little too relaxed, she answered him as she climbed up the stairs. Listen, that attitude isn't going to get us very far on these seas. I agree with that, Robin smiled. Pirates rarely get a chance to relax and not have to worry about attack. Hey, Usopp retorted, I was kidding. But his past self fell to his knees, suddenly looking exhausted. I don't think I wanna hear this. The waves look a little too strange for comfort, she went on, looking at the sky and the sea before giving them orders to turn to port. It wasn't a moment too soon, for a giant wave suddenly came up behind them and Usopp and Chopper screamed as she smiled knowingly. Any thoughts of resting now far from their minds as they went to work. Wait, there's something in there, Brook called, and as the waves came closer, the faces of 3 giant monkeys appeared. Sea monkeys. The past Usopp screamed and the memory disappeared. Yo-ho-ho-ho, it's just one thing after enough. Brook said happily, that's how it's been since you came to the Grand Line. It was only after leaving Alabasta did you guys have even a little bit of a break. But now it's just adventure after adventure. Yeah, I'm tired just thinking about it, Chopper said. And it's only going to get harder from here. We're going to get to Water 7 and Enies lobby soon. Yes, I read about that in the logbook as well. Brook said at once, I am truly anxious to see that. I can't believe that you all invaded such a place on your own. It was definitely one of our biggest wins ever, Zoro agreed, but boy was that day a pain in the ass. A job well worth it in the end, Sanji sighed happily, looking at Robin with love-struck eyes. The new memory popped up and the sun was already up high as most of the Straw Hats laid exhausted on the deck, looking ready to just fall asleep there. I guess you had a long night. Frankie asked cheerfully. Those stupid monkeys followed us for hours, Usopp said wearily. His past self was suddenly yelling from the crow's nest that an unknown ship was sailing towards them. Luffy asked if they were bad guys and Usopp seemed lost to what to tell them. Well, he called, they don't have a single flag or sail up. I don't know what kind of ship it is. What? Frankie said, going to the upper front part of the ship to see for himself. That's ridiculous. Who would come out to the sea, let alone the Grand Line, without a sail? Were they trying to die? The Straw Hats, other than Brook, all groaned out miserably, knowing just what this memory was about. You've got to be kidding me, Usopp groaned out. The Foxy Pirates. We're going to be seeing Split Head again. Split Head? Brook asked in confusion. Remember when we went to that spa island after you joined us? Nami asked him, that guy with the stupid hair who was after Lena and Sayo. Brook and Frankie thought that over for a moment. Oh yeah, Frankie said, I remember. Back when they were trying to find a clue to how to make the rainbow gem. That weirdo with the long red nose and the mirror thingy in the shape of his head. Yeah, him, Nami sighed in disgust, looks like we're going to be seeing him very soon. I'm guessing that's bad, Brook asked. He was such a pain to deal with, Usopp hissed, do yourself a favor and never play a game with him. He's the biggest cheater in the world. It's naked. Luffy yelled up at him in confusion, who would do that to their ship? What are they doing out here without sails? Just what I wanna know, Frankie said, looking out and spotting it as well. It was really a good-looking ship. It was well built and looked strong, but all that strength is nothing without sails to move it. And it was completely stripped clean of any way for it to move. How should I know? Past Usopp yelled back in annoyance. What's even weirder is the crew is way too small for a ship that size. Also, they look like they're cationic or something. They're just sitting around in a daze. Why do I not like the look of this? Asked Brook, having a bad feeling. That wasn't normal, even the most inexperienced sailors know that they need sails for their ship. But the Straw Hats from the past didn't have time to think it over, for at that moment the sea monkeys were back and another wave came. They didn't waste time as they broke out the paddles and began heading off at full speed. They could see the monkeys' faces smiling evilly from the waves, delight in the idea of sinking them. Why are they after you? Frankie yelled. They said that they like to sink ships. Chopper yelled, able to make out their voices through the laughter. What's wrong with them? Memory Sanji cried out. They were almost right next to the naked ship. They're heading towards the sea monkeys. I'm afraid that there wasn't anything that could be done for them, Robin said, remembering what happened here. Luffy yelled at them as they passed to wake up and that they'd be swallowed whole if they didn't turn around. The crew then realized what was going on, but instead of focusing on getting out of there, they began shouting and yelling. It couldn't have been any clearer that they had no idea to what they were doing. They didn't seem to have a captain or a navigator and were all fighting with each other like a bunch of kids on the playground, not even noticing the wave. "What's with these guys?" Frankie asked with a deadpan expression. "Did they just set sail for the first time or something? What's going on?" "Whoa," Luffy whispered, staring at them, "that's got to be the worst crew ever." "Took the words out of my mouth," Current Usopp whispered to himself. "Forget about those idiots." Memory Sanji yelled, "All of them still at the oars, they only want to steal our treasure." The other ship couldn't make up their minds what to do, but it was already too late. They had been swallowed by the wave and they watched it sink. "That was harsh," Frankie whispered, "but you can't say they didn't deserve it." "Just what was with them? They had worse luck than we did, I suppose." Robin offered, "I'm sure that it will all make sense to you soon." "Man, it's just one terrible thing after another these days," Memory Zoro hissed in annoyance once the waves had turned calm at last, showing that they were near the next island. "Yeah, that's true," Chopper sighed, "things just seemed to go downhill after we left Sky Island. They didn't start to look up until after Eni's lobby." Once Memory Nami explained that the waves had been caused by the sea monkeys, she stated that they should be nearing the next island by now so they shouldn't have to worry. The funny thing was when Usopp called up to Robin, where he lay on the deck, if she saw any signs of land, she confessed that they had been nearing one for a while. Luffy then began to tell her off, but when she apologized, he accepted it without a second thought so long as she meant it. "It sure doesn't take much for him to forgive you, does it?" Nami chuckled. "Luffy's normally not the kind to hold petty grudges," Robin smiled, "at least not for long. So long as you mean it, he'll accept your apology." "Something I've always admired about him," Brook said fondly. "You know, I can't stop thinking about that ship." Memory Usopp suddenly spoke up and past and present turned to look at him. "They didn't have a captain, or a navigator, or even sails," he said, voicing what they all talked about. It was like they had no idea what they were doing. Now what kind of self-respecting pirate would head out to sea like that? The past Zoro suggested that maybe they were in a battle and lost, their captain got killed and the ship plundered. "That does seem like the most reasonable answer," Brook said, thinking it all over. "But that can't be it," Memory Usopp stated. "I gotta look at their ship. It was in perfect condition. No signs of battle, but it was still completely stripped clean of anything that a pirate would need to survive. They probably weren't even pirates then." Past Sanji shrugged, "Forget it." Current Sanji sighed, knowing that this came back later to bite them in the ass. What a day that was. Memory Usopp didn't seem ready to let it go, muttering that they looked like pirates to him, crummy ones, but pirates nonetheless. He also added that he suddenly had a bad feeling about all this. "And my instincts turn out to be right once again," he nodded to his past self's words. "What are you?" "Oh, forget it," Frankie sighed, sick of asking questions but never getting any answers. "If it's important, I'm sure to find out." Onwards they sailed. Through the mist, they finally landed. What they saw surprised them all. "There's nothing at all," Luffy screamed out. He was right. There was nothing but grass and trees stretching on for miles around them. "Now this has got to be the dullest island I've ever seen," Frankie muttered, "makes me want to take a nap just looking at it." "Yeah, but we did everything but sleep here," Chopper thought to himself. Despite Memory Nami's warning Chopper, Usopp and Luffy jumped ship and started exploring. They rolled in the grass for a moment before they heard footsteps behind them. They looked behind them and some of them gasped at what it was and they heard Memory Chopper scream out in shock. "What is that?" Brook cried out. It was human-like, but it was covered in thick fur and towered over them all. Even Brook was short compared to it. "That is a bear, a long bear," Usopp answered as they watched the giant creature walk by upright. They followed the trio further inland, and they soon saw that everything on this island was filled with animals and plants that were stretched out in either length or height. They walked on for a short time, passing the strange animals to find an unoccupied house. As Luffy went barging in as he usually did, with Usopp trying to stop him, Memory Chopper went looking around the house and called to the others that he had found a giraffe. "But a giraffe is already long," Frankie pointed out, "how can it get any longer?" "That's because it wasn't a giraffe," Chopper laughed a little as they went around the house to see what he was talking about. What they say certainly looked like a giraffe, however they soon found out that it was a white horse with her limbs and neck stretched out. "Wow," Frankie said, moving his sunglasses up to look up at her. "Isn't she a beauty? It's Shelly." Current Chopper cheered happily as Memory Usopp gasped out that it was a horse with a long neck rather than a giraffe. "You're a horse?" Memory Chopper asked in amazement as she lowered her head so that she could nuzzle his cheek and he laughed as he hugged her. "Wow," Luffy said as he was actually able to walk underneath her, the top of his hat just tickling her stomach. "What a pretty horse." The horse neighed as Chopper translated for them. "She says thank you. And her name's Shelly. That means we're going to be seeing that weird Stilts guy again, right?" Zoro asked them. "Yep." Usopp nodded as his past self noticed the saddle. "Boy, was he strange. Stilts guy." Brook repeated as Memory Usopp noticed Luffy staring off in one direction. When he asked what was wrong, Luffy just pointed, saying that there was something up with those two bamboo trees. Why is everything here so long? Frankie couldn't help but ask as he looked up, and memory Usopp voiced what he was thinking. Yeah, you're right. Talk about tall. He gasped as the two trees went up into the sky so that they vanished. I can't even see the top. That's not it, Luffy said, look closer. Past Usopp did what he was told, looking so close that his long nose was almost touching it. But then it started moving and he screamed in shock. Luffy screamed as well, yelling that they had to be part of some long animal. What kind of animal is made of bamboo? Brook cried out as the second bamboo tree hit Luffy from behind and sent him sprawling in the grass. But instead of answering Usopp's questions of concern, Luffy lost his temper and went to kick at the bamboo trees, breaking them in half. They were starting to celebrate, but their victory was short-lived, for something came falling from the sky and landed with a crash on the ground. I'm guessing that this is where you met him? Sanji asked, and Chopper and Usopp nodded as the two ran over to see whatever fell. Memory Chopper must have heard the noise and came running from behind the house to see what the problem was and spotted the two of them. They also gathered around them and they saw, to some of them in astonishment, that there was an elderly man with wrinkles, small round eyes, and a round white beard looking back up at them. Who is that? Brook asked. Of all the things that he was expecting to see, this wasn't one of them. There were old men falling from the sky. Where did he even come from? I think that bamboo tree was possessed by this spirit, Luffy decided at last. A spirit? Chopper asked in wonder. I gotta say, I can see why he would think that, Frankie muttered, but I think he's just an old man. He is, Sanji answered, but let's just say that he had a very unusual hobby. Well yeah, what else pops out of a tree? Luffy asked. Usopp poked the old man, asking if he's still alive until he sat up so quickly that he startled some of them. Quit acting like I don't remember you. Of course I do, the old man said hurriedly. What have you been up to all these years? You mean that you knew him? Brook asked in surprise. No, not at all, Usopp said as his memory self asked them the exact same question. But when Chopper and Luffy shook their heads, the old man finished, well that would explain why I don't remember you then. I can tell that this guy has gotten some issues, Frankie said, falling over at what the old man said. Well, he has a good reason for it. Nami laughed a little as memory Usopp demanded the old man tell them who he was. And so he did. They learned that the old man's name was Tanjit, and he thanked them for knocking him off his bamboo stilts. They looked at the broken bamboo trees to see that they were indeed stilts, and Luffy said they didn't realize that he was up there because they couldn't see him. Tanjit said that he wasn't surprised. He couldn't even see the ground from up there. When Luffy asked why he was walking around on those things in the first place, Tanjit answered that he was inspired one day to break the world record for the longest stilts. He told them that he had been able to get on with a little effort, but he was too scared to climb back down. That's crazy, Luffy said. I was up there for 10 years, Tanjit admitted. Really crazy. Luffy yelled in shock as Frankie and Brook both felt their jaws hit the ground. You're kidding me. Frankie yelled out, you mean to tell me that he was on stilts for 10 years? How is that possible? Memory Usopp felt the same way. Wait, you were up on those stilts for 10 whole years? He screamed at him. That's right, Tanjit answered causally with his back to them, and to make matters worse, the bamboo kept growing the entire time. It just got harder and harder to climb down. Oh, so terrifying. He's sure taking the fact that he wasted 10 years up on stilts with no problems, Zoro muttered with a few sweat drops around his head. How did you live up there for 10 years? Memory Usopp screamed. Well, most of the trees on this island are just as tall as my stilts, if not taller, Tanjit answered calmly, so I was well fed from their fruit. That's good, Nami asked, unsure if she should be glad for the old man or not. But Luffy was soon asking why everything on the island was so insanely long. Tanjit said that though it may seem crazy to an outsider, there was a reason. This place was nothing but grass and trees. It was so dull here that everything felt the need to stretch out, and soon grew long out of a longing for excitement. You've got to be kidding me, Zoro whispered as Tanjit invited the three into his house and offered them some milk, only to find that it had turned to cheese within the 10 years he'd been up on the stilts. But Tanjit ate it anyway, only to get food poisoning. No duh, that cheese is 10 years old. Of course that it would almost kill him. Usopp yelled out. Well, some cheese tastes better with age, Robin spoke up in amusement. But 10 years? Usopp asked her exasperatedly as Tanjit went on to tell them how he was part of a village of nomads. The island that they were on was their home, Long Ring Long Island. The island was actually part of a chain of 10 islands in a ring-like shape. The paths between the islands that surfaces once every year, and they used this time to pack up and move to the next island once every 3 years. I see, Brook said thoughtfully, so his village didn't disappear, they simply moved. And if there's 10 islands, then that would mean that it would take about 30 years for them to do a complete lap around the island, Robin said, thinking it all over. Memory Usopp did the math as well, quickly calculating that if the other villagers stayed on each island for 3 years, then minus the 10 years living on those stupid stilts, it would still take a good 20 years for them to come back and meet up with him again. Tanjit sighed grimly, already aware of this fact. He seemed to accept it however as he said that there wasn't anything else he could do. If he still had his horse, he could cross over every time the tides were low and catch up to the others in only a few years. Why doesn't he just say their names instead of making them so long? Sanji whispered to himself. Whatever makes him happy. Zoro offered. Horse. Memory Chopper repeated and Tanjit shut his eyes, a peaceful expression coming over his face. That's right, he said, they're the most graceful and beautiful animals on the whole island. He then went on to tell them that without them the villagers wouldn't be able to migrate to the next island. Even if they were strong enough to carry their belongings on their own, the tides would still rise up and drown them before they could get to the next island. Luffy then asked if it would be easier to just take a boat. You would think that'd be the best option, but how would they reach the island with a log pose if they are already on the island? Nami asked grimly. Tanjit admitted that it probably would, however the villagers weren't known for their sailing. And even if they did charge a log pose to this island, that was no guarantee that it would point to the next island. Because even though the island was split into 10 pieces, it was part of the same island. He just sadly admitted that he would just have to wait another 10 years. Poor man, Brooke said softly, my heart goes out to him, if I had a heart to give, but he didn't laugh for he knew just how painful it was to be alone. To spend years and years with a loneliness so strong that it felt like it was going to drown him in a sea of despair. He shivered at that, wondering how the old man could stand to stay on top of those stilts for all those years. Even if he was afraid to climb down, risking it was better than staying up there, right? Luffy seemed to agree. He frowned sadly at Tanjit's words, looking like he wished he could do something to help. But Memory Chopper then asked if a horse was the same thing as a normal horse. Hey, I almost forgot about that. Luffy said, brightening up, we saw a horse on the way here. That got Tanjit's attention. You're saying that there's a horse here? He asked at once as he stood up. Yeah, Chopper said, pointing his hoof at the door, just around back. She said her name was Shelly. At his words, Tanjit's eyes widened in shock and amazement as he went running to the door. They all followed him to where Tanjit was looking around wildly for the horse. After several seconds Shelly came out from behind the house when she heard him calling her name, and she neighed happily when she saw him. The Straw Hats all felt smiles on their faces when Tanjit burst into tears as he ran over to her and hugged her head tightly as he told her how beautiful and long she had grown and how sorry he was for making her wait all these years. That is something special, Usopp said as he watched the scene. She waited here for him all these years even when everyone else left. Frankie fell to his knees as he burst out sobbing, unable to hold it in. Aw man, that's just the best. Shelly, I love you. Now that's real loyalty. Brook smiled sadly. He felt a strong connection to Shelly already, and he couldn't help but wonder if Laboon would be as happy to see him as Shelly was with Tanjit. Shelly suddenly reared up on her hind legs, calling happily as Chopper translated that she wanted to go for a ride. And so they all sat back and watched as Tanjit swung himself up onto her back, and they indeed went for a ride across the green fields with smiles on their faces. This is so wonderful, Brook said happily, clapping his hands together, a happy ending. Don't you hate being wrong all the time? Sanji sighed and the two looked at him in surprise. What's the problem? Frankie demanded. I don't see one. The old man and his horse are together again, and when the tides go down they can cross over and reach the other villagers. Maybe, Robin said softly, but as we all know, things are never as simple as we believe them to be. Just then they all heard the sounds of a gunshot being heard, and Shelly fell so hard and fast that Tanjit was flung off and landed painfully on the ground. What happened? Brooke screamed out in outrage that someone would dare to hurt Shelly. That would be Foxy, Nami said, also feeling a strong surge of anger after seeing what happened. Though she still wasn't happy that Luffy accepted the fight, she could fully understand why he did. Meanwhile, Memory, Usopp and Chopper jumped up and ran to them, crying out what happened as Luffy got up as well and was glaring around, trying to figure out who fired. When they went to the two on the grass, they were relieved to see that it wasn't a gunshot but rather it was a steel net. However, Shelly's legs were all tangled up in it and Tanjit stumbled back to her before he fell to the ground in pain. Is he hurt? Frankie yelled anxiously, rage boiling inside him. He hurt his back, but it wasn't bad, Chopper answered as his past self went over to examine him and Usopp went to untangle Shelly's legs. But as they looked to Luffy, they saw that he was focused only on 3 people standing farther away. It's those losers, Sanji groaned out. He knew this was coming, but still, just seeing them reminded them of the nightmare of those stupid games. But he drooled a little at the woman with dark blue hair, blue eyes, and a long pointed nose standing with them. She also wore an outfit adorned by several large, white puff balls, the most notable one being the one hanging from her hat, and a black face mask covered the upper half of her face. There was also a large gorilla-like human standing there as well, who seemed to be giggling to himself. But out of all of them, the strangest was the man standing between them. A rather stout man with skinny arms and legs with his hair split into 2 spikes pointing upwards. He had thick, triangle-like eyebrows, and he also had a nose as long as Usopp's, only his was red. He was wearing poofy yellow-orange pants that were held up by suspenders, and there was an elaborate necklace hanging on his chest with many circular orange and yellow pendants with a blue, bigger central one with ears on it that resembled a fox with the form of a sword hanging from his pants. And out of all three weirdos, he was the one holding a smoking gun, which could only mean that he was the one who fired at Shelly. What a freak, Frankie whispered. You can say that again, Zoro nodded. But why did he do such a thing? Brook demanded hotly. Even if he's a pirate, why would he go after Shelly? He's a jerk, that's why, Nami said furiously. That's Foxy. Or Splithead as we call him. Sorry suckers, but that horse is mine. Foxy yelled out with an annoying laugh. She doesn't belong to you. Brook yelled in outrage. You leave her alone. Yeah, you tell him, boss, the woman said to Foxy firmly. Put those losers in their place. Loser. What do you call that guy standing next to you? Zoro asked with his eyebrows raised. Luffy looked furious and yelled out, whoever you are, you'll pay. Whoever you are. The man repeated slowly. You don't know. I wish we never found out, Usopp sighed. Why do we keep running into nutjobs like him out here? Maybe it's karma. Sanji shrugged. Maybe we all did something really bad in a past life and that's why we're being punished like this. Well, if we are, I'm sure that it was all Mosshead's fault. Why outa? Zoro began to threaten until Foxy asked Luffy, don't tell me you've never seen this face before. The only thing I know about your face is that I'm gonna break it. Luffy roared out. That's all I need to know too, Frankie said before he noticed Foxy falling to his knees in depression and a dark cloud appeared over his head as the woman, named Porch they found out, was trying to comfort him and get him back to his feet. Is he alright? Brook asked slowly. The thing about Foxy, Nami said, he sure isn't good about hiding his emotions. Just one little insult is enough to bring him to his knees. What a dope, Frankie stated as Foxy slowly got back up to his feet. My name is Foxy, he growled, what's mine is mine, and what's yours is mine too. Fei, you should see the looks on your dumb faces. What kind of pansy gets so worked up over some stupid horse? If I didn't steal that thing then somebody else would. What was that? Frankie yelled in rage. Stupid horse. She's far from stupid. And she's not some piece of property for you to take. He gritted his teeth together. Man, we just ran into him and I already wanna give him the beating of a lifetime. That's enough. Luffy yelled out, ready to kick out until Foxy surprised them all by saying, hold it Luffy. Not yet. Luffy was so startled by that he stopped in mid-kick, demanding to know how he knew his name. But it turned out they knew more than just his name, however, he wasn't here to fight. He surprised them all by holding up 3 coins and challenged Luffy to a Davy back fight. Oh, that's what happened. Frankie cried out in understanding. A Davy back fight. Brook repeated sounding lost. It's nothing good. Chopper said at once as Luffy proclaimed that he didn't know what he was talking about, but if he wanted to fight, then he was more than willing to do so. That got Usopp's attention, who heard what they were saying. Luffy no. He yelled, we're gonna end up losing our crew. Lose your crew. Brook cried out in horror. Unfortunately, it's true, Robin answered calmly. You're about to see. Luffy glared back at him, what are you talking about Usopp? I know this guy's a jerk. Memory Usopp yelled as he ran forward towards him, but you can't agree to fight him. Foxy laughed, telling him that it was already too late, that Luffy already agreed to the fight and it was too late to turn back now. Taunting him that maybe he wasn't man enough to keep his word. Oh, that did it, Zoro sighed as Luffy looked furious. Even when Usopp tried to stop him, Luffy demanded what they were going to do about Shelly. But Tanjit had already got back to his feet and pointed a gun at Foxy, telling the two of them to get out of the way so that he could get a clear shot. There wasn't a trace of the kind old man who welcomed them into his home. You go old man, Frankie cheered. Are you crazy? Memory Usopp asked. I really thought he was here, the current one said. He didn't stand a chance against them. No matter how pathetic Foxy was, he and his whole crew had the old man outnumbered. How many are we talking about? Like around 50 or 100. Brook asked. 500, Robin answered. What? Brook yelled out, flabbergasted. Mostly ones he won from other crews. Zoro sighed, like anyone in their right minds would follow that idiot. Tanjit wasn't backing down though. Shelly waited 10 years for me to come back. He yelled, I won't let you take her. You'd have to go through me. The current chopper yelled out in agreement. I know that you're angry. Luffy yelled, pointing at them, but those are pirates old man. So what do you say boy? Foxy asked Luffy. You up, for a Davy back fight? I don't know what you're talking about, but bring it on. Luffy yelled back heatedly. And the memory faded when Foxy tossed over a gun to Luffy and together they fired them into the air. Okay, Brook said as they were back in a different part of the forest now. What is this thing? I've never heard of a Davy back fight. But I'm guessing it's not good. I guess that it wasn't created during your days as a pirate, Usopp muttered, as he thought about how he could explain this stupid game. Like Usopp said before, Chopper said softly, you lose your crewmates. Here's how it is, Robin spoke up. A Davy back fight is a series of games between two pirate crews to win each other's crewmates to strengthen their own crew. Little is known about the history of the game, except that one day, on a faraway island known as Pirate Island, some pirates decided to create a game to strengthen their crew. So you force people to join you? Brook asked softly, unable to believe what he was hearing. Pretty much, Zoro said. But in order for the Davy back fight to begin, both captains must agree to the terms. Robin answered, if successful, both captains will fire a gun at the same time into the air, sealing the agreement. Right after, the exact rules will be said to the teams of both crews. What rules are those? Brook asked. Well, first is that any crew members or symbols lost during the Davy back fight may only be retrieved through another Davy back fight, Usopp answered grumpily. And then the selected crew members must immediately swear loyalty to their opponent's captain, Sanji added in a bored way. And, Zoro finished, if your symbol is taken, you must never raise it again. If a crew wins a challenge, it is the captain's job to pick the team member they want. If the captain does not like anyone, they may take the crew's flag, requiring the crew to remove their flags and sails, which may not be used again. The only exception may be if it is somehow won back. So in other words, winning could make you stronger, Sanji said grimly, but losing means leaving you with nothing. You might as well be betting your life. Wait, then that explains the ship that we saw on the way here. Brook called out as he understood. They must have lost everything in a Davy back fight. Yeah, while you guys were over with the old man and the horse, we met the rest of Foxy's crew and they told us about how they were the ones who beat them, Nami said, but what made me angry was that the guys they took from that crew didn't care when we told them that they sank to the bottom of the ocean. They didn't care. Brook said in horror. How could you not care about your own crewmates? Even if you were part of a new crew. They sailed all the way through the Grand Line together, but they just no longer cared about them when they heard about their fate. There are all types of pirates, Zoro answered, but these guys rank low even on that scale. But you all are still on this crew, Brook said, so I'm guessing that it all worked out in the end. Just barely, Nami sighed. But yeah, I guess you're right. In the next memory they looked like they were in Carnival, but the Foxy pirates all had this set up. If they were going to risk losing crew members, they were going to at least have a good time. They didn't say much as they watched Luffy and Foxy sitting in chairs on a stage with porches. They decided how many games they were going to play. Since Foxy was the challenger, Luffy had the choice of picking a one-game Davy back fight up to a three-game one. Both Memory, Usopp and Nami each held up a single finger, letting him know that he was to pick one. However, Hamburg was standing next to them and also held up one finger and Luffy counted them all up, so they were playing 3 games. They all sat back and watched as the Memory Straw Hats all gathered around together, filling out a roster to decide who would participate in which game. The events were a race where all of them could sign up, a ball game where they needed 3, and a team contest where they could have up to 5 members. Each one of them can participate in an event twice, no more, despite Luffy complaints that he wanted to go for all 3. In the end, everyone decided to join up for the race. Then Zoro, Sanji, and Chopper all signed up for the ball game, with the rest of the crew joining up for the contest even though they were one short. Alright, the announcer, a man with a round, pink nose and broad mouth that took up most of his face, called through a large transponder snail that was serving as a microphone, and flying around on a large bird with a striped ski cap on his head. I'll take this time while everyone's preparing to explain how the race works. The course consists of 1 lap around Long Ring Long Land. That doesn't sound so bad, Frankie said slowly before the announcer finished. It may sound easy, but believe me, it's not. If your boat sinks, you're immediately disqualified from the race. Oh yeah, weapons. They're allowed. Guns, cannons, explosives, anything you can think of. If that sounds unfair, then you've got no right to call yourself a pirate. And time is just about up. I hope everybody is ready. Sure, they can use stuff against you, but you guys can too, Brook said. If anything goes, then that should also mean that any form of cheating is allowed during the contests, and players may use any special abilities or devil fruit powers to give them an advantage. Oh, believe me, Nami said, a muscle going in her forehead, these guys spent a lot of time finding new inventive ways to cheat. It got annoying very quickly. By the end of all this, I was ready to pound them all into the dirt. They all waited until the match started and watched. Parts of it was fun to watch, but the cheating soon got so outlandish that they were all growing frustrated with every second. The first round was called the Donut Race, and all teams had to build a makeshift boat out of nothing but 3 barrels and 2 oars. Each team then races around the island, trying to avoid obstacles and enemy cheating in order to make it to the finish line first. Deciding that their best choice was to split up into 3 teams, Nami, Usopp, and Robin made up one team, with Sanji and Luffy as another, and Chopper and Zoro as the final team. They were all able to construct several boats that barely floated using nothing but the required materials, but all of Foxy's teams had no problems cheating. Such as Porch's team using a shark to pull their boat, and another team using barrels the size of ships. This is just ridiculous, Frankie said as they all nodded with him. The race was dirty to say the least. The Foxy pirates used everything and did everything that you could think of to cheat. In the end though, almost every team was taken out except for Nami, Usopp, and Robin, and Porch and her team. But when the Straw Hats took the lead, almost reaching the finishing line, something strange had happened. They somehow ended up slowing down to an almost complete stop and couldn't seem to move. What happened to you guys? Frankie asked. You were almost there. You let them pass. We didn't let them win. Nami snapped back. What their captain didn't tell us was that he had the powers of a devil fruit. A really stupid one, but it stopped us in our tracks. Why? What could it do? Brook asked anxiously. Please, he could only do the same old trick over and over, Zoro said in a bored voice. And it's probably the only reason they kept winning crew members. Whenever they start to lose, they just kept changing all the rules until they win. How can you call that winning if you have to cheat to get there? Sanji asked, rolling his eyes. At the end of the race, Porch was able to win and the Straw Hats were all gathered around, trying to figure out what happened. You guys hurt? Memory Chopper asked worriedly, examining them, making sure that they were all in one piece. They all said the same thing, they were all right, none of them had so much as a scratch, but they couldn't figure out what had happened. What the heck happened out there? Luffy asked in bafflement. That's what I want to know, Brook said. Why would anyone stop in the middle of a race, especially when they were at the finish line? I'd like to know the same thing. Memory Nami said. We all like to know what happened. Past Usopp added, sounding completely baffled. Did we really lose somehow? It looked like you were gonna win, Luffy said, but then you slowed down and they passed you. Stupid Foxy, present-day Nami hissed. That was when Foxy came over to them, laughing at that as he said that it was caused by slow-mo protons. They all glared at him, demanding to know what he did. And with Hamburg shooting a cannonball at Foxy, he gave them a demonstration. He was able to create these particles in the form of a strange light, and anything touched by this light would be slowed down and stay like that for about 30 seconds. You've got to be kidding me, Frankie said with a blank expression. Just what kind of devil fruit could do that? I wish he was, Usopp whispered. And Foxy proved it, for as the light hit the cannonball it had stopped and slowed to a crawl. They stared in shock at it, amazed as Foxy bragged about it, at least until he hadn't moved from where he was and the cannonball ended up hitting him anyway. What an idiot, Current Chopper whispered. You'd think he'd at least move, Robin said, but I guess 30 seconds wasn't enough time for him to finish bragging. Considering how sensitive he is, it doesn't surprise me, Nami stated, he's got a heart of glass. Yo-ho-ho-ho, Nami-san is harsh, Brook said happily. As the Foxy pirates went to see if Foxy was alright, the Straw Hats were all glaring at them all. I get it, Memory Usopp hissed, so that's why we didn't win the race. That also explains why they're so overly confident by these games, Past Sanji added darkly, what a joke of a devil fruit power. Aside from those beams, he can't do anything but cheat, Zoro muttered with a roll of his eyes. He's got nothing else but that going for him. Sad, present-day Usopp whispered. It doesn't matter. Porch screamed at them, you guys lost. You know all the rules and you agreed to all the terms. The donut race is over. Foxy yelled out, and we are the winners. Winners my ass, Frankie muttered. That whole race was a joke. But there was nothing they could do as they watched Foxy head up to the stage and declared the crew member he wanted, which happened to be Chopper. Chopper, Luffy yelled in horror. So you were forced to join them, Chopper-san. Brook said softly. Yeah, and it's not a fond memory, Chopper said softly. I left home because I wanted to join Luffy and the others. Not Foxy. I'm so happy you all won me back. We all are, Robin smiled down, knowing how Chopper felt. So that creep had his eyes set on Chopper, Memory Sanji said, well, I suppose he really is among the rarest of rare animals. Should I take that as a compliment or an insult? Chopper asked the current Sanji, who shrugged. Whatever you want, he answered back. Or maybe he collects cute things. Memory Nami suggested. You know, I wouldn't rule out a fur fetish, Robin answered. Would you all stop that? Chopper outside the memory yelled. Sorry, Nami laughed a little. Why does it even matter? Memory Usopp yelled. Focus people. That freak over there just took our friend. Chopper sighed, at least one of them seemed upset with it all. But when he looked to his memory self, who was set in a chair on the stage and was forced to put a mask on. Feeling the mask was too much for him. You guys, he screamed out to his former crew, tears falling hard and fast. Listen, I only went out to sea because of you. I won't. No, I refuse. Luffy, you invited me. I set sail to be one of the Straw Hats. I won't go with them. Please no. I am the ship's doctor of the Straw Hat Pirates. Tony Chopper. I won't GGGGGGO. My heart is breaking for you, Chopper-san, Brook sniffled. Not that I have one. Chopper didn't answer him. He hated this experience, the idea that he was going to be separated from the very people who accepted him for who he was, let him come with them on so many adventures scared him. Oh, grow up, current Zoro said. Zoro-san. Brook yelled just as Memory Zoro, who had been drinking, slammed his bottle down on the grass so hard that it sank into the ground several inches. Quit your belly-aching, Chopper. He yelled. It's disgraceful. You made the choice to set sail as a pirate. Only you. Now you have to live with the consequence of that decision. A pirate's life isn't always easy or fun, Zoro said, but we often have no one but ourselves to blame when things go wrong. Besides, you honestly thought that we weren't going to win you back. Chopper shook his head. Of course not, he declared, but Luffy is my only captain. And I know that he'll never be defeated by a guy like him. He's gonna become the king of the pirates. That's more like it, Zoro said approvingly. His past self then finished up, the foxy pirates all looking at him in awe. We agreed to the terms of this game. You, Usopp, and everyone else did the best they could. He stood up. Not one pirate worth his salt is gonna sympathize with those tears. A man, he turned and gave them a hard look, would suck it up and quietly watch the rest of this game. Did you have to say it that harshly? Current Nami asked him sharply, with her past self telling the same thing to the memory version of the swordsman. It needed to be said, Zoro said. Chopper had to just suck it up and deal with it until we got him back. And we did get him back, enough said. Memory Chopper seemed to realize that he was right as he swallowed his tears. He sat down in the chair as he yelled out to his new crew, boil me or cook me alive. Give me your worst, you bastards. The foxy pirates all cheered loudly at that as Memory Zoro said, that a boy. And the memory then disappeared after that. You are so cool, Zoro-san, Brook said happily. That speech was incredible. I just don't get it, Nami said softly to Robin, who laughed. It's a men thing, she answered back in a whisper. I don't think that we'd ever understand it, but I think that they care more about looking cool in front of others than let's see tears. Nami sighed, shaking her head. Men were so stupid sometimes, them and their pride. The next few memories popped up soon after that. The memory Straw Hats all learned that since the other team took Chopper, he would no longer be able to compete in this round. Which meant that there was only going to be Zoro and Sanji in the game, with no one to keep them from fighting each other. So, you two were going to work together to win Chopper back? Frankie asked them all slowly. Really, if Chopper's only hope on coming back to the Straw Hats was if these two worked together, then he was screwed. Surprisingly, they did win, Usopp said, but it sure didn't look good at the start. They all listened to the rules of this event, which everyone snorted at that. Here, teams of 3 from each pirate crew choose one of their members to be the ball, and the other team has to try and knock the opposing team's ball into the goal once. This event forbids the use of weapons, as it is a sport, though other kinds of cheating were allowed. No weapons. What shit, Sanji hissed, remembering the spikes on that giant fisherman's feet. They weren't even bothering to hide the fact that they were cheating, and that damn referee didn't do a thing. Oh, he was more than satisfied when he took him out. The present-day Straw Hats all stood on the sidelines with the others as they watched the two teams on the field. It wasn't off to a good start. Memory Zoro had volunteered Sanji to be the ball, and they put a ball-shaped hat on Sanji's head. Naturally, Sanji didn't like it. Who said you get to pick? He demanded loudly, you're the ball, you moss-headed bastard. I'm not too hopeful here, Chopper, Frankie said quietly. Neither was I, Chopper whispered to him. And how did they cheat here? Brook asked, but he stopped when the other team came onto the field and his question was answered at once. On the field, Hamburg, who was already larger than a normal human, and 2 others had just come into view. The next guy was larger than Hamburg with long arms and short legs in comparison to his body and a hippo-like face whose name was Pickles. They all laughed at the stupid name, but he was still smaller than the next guy. A half-giant, half-fishman called Big Pan who towered over them all, easily capable of stepping on them all into paste. He had slippery mudfish skin, sharp teeth, and an orange dorsal fin that matched his orang hair and beard, and he was the one who had the strap-on ball on his head. Could they at least try not making the cheating so obvious? Nami yelled. Seeing these stupid games brought back all that anger and she felt an urge to hit Foxy in the face all over again. They started things off with a coin loss, which the Straw Hats lost. Who wants to bet that they were using a double-faced coin or something? Robin asked suddenly. Knowing these sore losers, it won't surprise me in the slightest if they had, Current Zoro said, giving the referee a dirty look. Meanwhile, the 2 memory selves were busy fighting over who has to be ball man, forced to start doing games of rock, paper, and scissors to see who has to do it. Memory Nami, now getting angry, yelled out to Sanji, that hat looks great on you. Alright, let's rock, Sanji declared, ball man's here to kick some ass. You really mean that, Nami Swan? Current Sanji asked lovingly. Well, you've looked worse, Nami said, and Sanji just seemed to almost fall over from happiness. Dumbass, present-day Zoro said softly. His past self then spoke up, I gotta admit it does suit you. You look like a real prince. From the kingdom of lame asses. Can't you get along for 5 minutes? Nami asked, for Chopper's sake if nothing else. He started it. They both snapped, pointing at the other before glaring at each other. Their past selves weren't much better, they were at each other's throats, now fighting each other. Memory Usopp yelled for the match to start, but before they did, the referee told Zoro to hand over his swords, no weapons allowed. Why didn't they check the other team for weapons? Chopper yelled out. Their referee is on their side, Robin reminded him, and he didn't watch half the game either when they were cheating. Nothing about this makes even the slightest bit of sense. Nami cried out. I just don't get any of this. Fine. Memory, Zoro yelled, passing his swords off before punching his fists together. My fists are all I need. You sure you're gonna be okay out there? Memory, Sanji asked him. A swordsman without his swords is just well. What? Past, Zoro demanded, annoyed. A normal guy, only lamer, he said before the two began to fight once again. That wasn't even a good burn. Memory, Usopp yelled out at them, boy, looking ready to do and say just about anything to get them to work together. Get over it. You're right, his insults are lame, present-day Zoro said coolly, and Sanji glared at him. But they're enough to get you angry, Sanji reminded him smugly. Do you really wanna die? Zoro yelled at him. Shut up, Nami yelled. The game was finally underway, but the biggest problem was that the two just didn't want to ask for help from the other. Soon the two were forced to run from Big Pan, with Usopp screaming at them not to run from the ball. But that was when they realized that there were spikes at the bottom of Pan's shoes. But as they screamed at the referee, he looked away and pretended not to see them. Now losing his anger, Sanji kicked so hard that one of his shoes flew off and hit the guy, almost knocking him out. Nice hit, Frankie smirked. This whole game is making me angry just watching. Welcome to our world, Usopp sighed as Memory Sanji was given the yellow card, and Memory Usopp was forced to hold him back before he went over to kill the referee. Meanwhile, past Zoro was still forced to run from Big Pan, who was swinging around a giant axe. An axe now? Brook asked, sweat drop hanging around his head. Weren't they even trying to hide it? There wasn't a point, Robin answered, because the referee was completely for Foxy's side to win. I have the feeling that they could have pulled out a cannon or a bomb on us and he would pretend not to hear it. I always thought this game might get ugly, Frankie said, looking at all the Foxy pirates, but I never thought that it would get this ugly. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Warm Memories and Brotherly Bonds by RoseDragonWitch. Usopp was now trying to get Sanji back in the game, with Memory Nami saving the day by asking him to win the match for her, which caused Sanji to run back to the field, only to be chased around by Pan. Due to the underhanded tactics and their massive size, and mostly due to the fighting between the two Straw Hats and bias on the referees pretending not to see this, the two were soon laying on the field all beat up and bleeding. Come on, I know you can do better than this. Current Usopp yelled at the two of them. At that moment, the two battered and bruised warriors were able to get back to their feet and prepare their counterattack, seemingly willing to let bygones be bygones just for this game. Then Sanji took out Hamburg without too much effort, and Zoro seemed to develop a technique that let him use blades though he didn't have any swords in his hands. Awesome, Chopper screamed out in amazement, his eyes shining. No sword style. Brook repeated, if he had eyes, they would be popping out of his head. I don't see how that's possible. Just think of it as mind over matter, Zoro answered. Truthfully, he didn't know how he was able to do it, but he supposed that he was so in tune with his blades, that he was able to tap into their strength even when he didn't have them with him. The game went on, and quite a few of them cheered with Sanji took out Pickles and sent him flying right into the referee. He would have seen it coming if he had been paying attention, Sanji smirked. Not my fault he wasn't doing his job. I mean, it's not like I broke his neck or anything. You're right, because if you had broken his neck, then he'd be dead, Robin offered, and Chopper turned pale at that. You could have been given the red card for that, Usopp pointed out, but Robin laughed as she pointed out that Memory Nami had already stolen his whistle and cards so that there wasn't anything he could do to get Sanji out of the game. Again, he wasn't paying attention, Nami stated, feeling a surge of pride go through her. If he had done his job right, he could have avoided all that pain and suffering. The two put aside their difference, and they were easily able to defeat the groggy monsters at long last, and the Foxy Pirates couldn't have been more stunned to see their team of titans defeated. This is payback for all the shit they thought they could get away with, Sanji smirked. As they returned to the stage, it was funny because each member of the Foxy Pirates thought that they were the one who was going to be chosen. Is it me, or does everyone have a bit of an ego in that crew? Frankie asked quietly. It's not you, Chopper sighed, remembering how much he hated being stuck with them. He was glad that Robin was going to be there to protect him from that crazy porch. But just as Luffy was about to tell them who he wanted, Memory Nami surprised them all by stopping him. What were you thinking of? Brook asked her. You were going to get Chopper back. Chopper looked away, knowing that wasn't exactly what happened. But at the same time, he couldn't be angry at Luffy for making his choice. What's up, Nami? Luffy asked her, and she had an evil grin on her face. She reminded them that Foxy was probably going to take part in the next game, and with his slow abilities, they wouldn't stand a chance. She then offered the idea of taking Foxy, and use his ability against his crew to win the next round and get Chopper back then. With Foxy on their side, the other pirates might be so lost without their boss they won't have an idea to what to do. That's dirty sis, Frankie muttered. And he wasn't the least bit surprised to see the uproar from the Foxy pirates. To take a crew's captain, it would be like if they took Luffy away from them, so of course they would be angry. The Foxy pirates were all outraged, yelling that they were underhanded cowards for doing such a thing. Please, current Sanji said, rolling his eyes, like they're ones to talk. I was going to kill them all for saying such cruel things to you, Nami dear. Memory Nami was crying into Robin's shirt. Why are they so mean? She asked her. They just don't like the idea that they were beaten and their biggest cheater could have been taken, Sanji said firmly. Well, even if it doesn't go against the rules, Memory Robin stated, it does seem to go against their pirate sensibilities. As they booed them, Luffy frowned and told them to shut up. Memory Usopp called out that he agreed with Nami on this one, however he said it from the safety of behind Zoro in case they started going after him. I don't know, Zoro retorted, I think they're right. Nami, why don't you grow a backbone? Faster than the eye could see, she ended up taking him out. You're just making a big fuss because you lost. She hissed, how about you shut up and deal with it? Yes ma'am, we're sorry. Foxy yelled as they all stood at attention. I should have done that from the start, the current navigator said as the men all gave her nervous looks, aside from Sanji that is, and inched away from her. As everyone was reminded that the rules did say, anybody, they all waited anxiously for Luffy to make up his mind. But then Memory Robin realized something. Say, she said, just a quick thought, this plan of yours. Although it would give us a big advantage, you realize it would also make Foxy a part of our crew. Okay, Frankie said slowly, if he was on your crew, I probably wouldn't have joined. No, I'd rather take anyone over Foxy, Zoro said with a nod. I was sick of listening to him by this point and I couldn't wait to get off this stupid island. Memory Nami blinked at that, clearly showing that she hadn't thought about that as the boys all said together, yeah, I think I'll pass. Once again, Foxy had become depressed with the rest of his crew there trying to get him back to his feet. He's the one who needs to grow a backbone, the current Usopp said and they all nodded as the announcer yelled, now that the Straw Hats are done emotionally abusing our boss. It's time for them to make their decision. Come on, don't leave us in suspense any longer. Fine, Luffy said, in that case, there's somebody I wanna take back. Memory Chopper's eyes lit up at once, but then Luffy shouted out, Shelly. What? Frankie and Brook yelled in shock. That's right, Nami said, having mixed feelings, he chose to take the horse. Everyone was dumbstruck at that. As Usopp and Nami yelled at him, pulling his face and stretching it all out in anger, Tanjit came over, pulling Shelly on a cart as she rested from her injury. Luffy smiled at them. There you go Stilts guy, he said to the old man, now you've got your horse back once and for all. So that's why he did it, Brook said in wonder. The whole reason he accepted the Davy back fight was to help that old man, Robin smiled. How can I thank you? Tanjit asked, gratitude in his voice. Seeing you together is thanks enough, Luffy answered happily. Even if he barely knows you, Zoro said calmly, if Luffy sees you as a friend, then he'll fight for you. I guess that he remembered the old man's kindness and is returning the favor. Frankie's lip was trembling. I don't know what to say to that. He gasped out. I'm so touched I can't speak. I am just so relieved that she's okay. Brook cried out in joy. Thank goodness. Thank you, Luffy-san. Tanjit asked in worry about their injuries but Luffy just laughed as Sanji and Zoro fought again, showing that they were already feeling better. Which they would have to put up with until they won their doctor back. Tanjit had tears in his eyes as he said, this means so much. Really, thank you. Seeing how happy the two were together, even Usopp and Nami couldn't help but smile, their anger at Luffy vanishing. After all, it was gestures like this that reminded them all the sole reason to why they joined Luffy in the first place. Memory Nami sighed. Well, I guess I can't blame him, she said, but she no longer sounded upset. After seeing those two, I just couldn't hate him for that. Usopp nodded as his past self was saying that was what he was going to do if it had been him. Sure you would, Zoro said sarcastically. Tanjit then said that he wanted to repay them by treating them to some of the cheese back at his house, which Usopp yelled he wouldn't do that in a million years. But it turns out that Tanjit was joking when he started laughing and bowed his head in thanks. Shelly neighed and Tanjit said, Shelly says thanks too. She did, Chopper said happily, she says that she can't thank Luffy enough. She didn't think that they were going to let her go. And that's all the more reason I can't take it, Frankie sobbed out. He tried to tell himself that he was a rock. A brick wall, but seeing how happy Shelly was after being reunited that he felt the wall crumble and he became a soggy sponge as he cried. Are you sure about this though? Tanjit said in worry as he looked back to the stage, to where Chopper was watching them sadly. What about your little reindeer friend? Yeah, you jerk. Nami snapped, remembering the matter at hand, how do you think he feels being left with those weirdos? Poor little guy. But there was still one more game. Brook pointed out, so you still had a chance. The new foxy pirate Chopper looked like he was gonna cry again until Luffy called to him, Chopper. I'm sorry. I know this is hard on you, but no matter what I promise we're gonna win the next game and get you back so hang on a little longer okay? I know you can take it. After all, you're a man right? Of course, the present day one called proudly. I said that I was going to be a more reliable man and I meant it. His past self sat back down in the chair and looked ready to deal with anything. That's our Chopper. Nami in the memory said softly and the memory disappeared. I think you were handling it all very well, Chopper-san, Brook said encouragingly. Thanks, Chopper answered, but I don't ever want to go into another Davy back fight again. Well, we'd probably win easy now, Sanji pointed out, reminding them all how strong they had become. In the next memory the Foxy Pirates were all building and working hard. It was amazing to see how quickly they were working together. When they were done, they saw that it had to be a stadium and a ring around it. I'm impressed, Frankie whistled as he dried his eyes and looked at the enormous ring. Well, they got the manpower, so it's not surprising they were able to build something this big in a short amount of time, Usopp said. I mean, it only took them a few hours to get it up. They could hear the announcer calling out to them all that they were now about to compete in the roller race. He called out that the point of the game was that they were to race on a circular track. The crew races each other on roller skates. There were a total of 5 rounds, and the first team to get to 3 wins would win the entire thing. Each team has a lead runner that starts 30 seconds before, and then the other races that protect their lead running and try to stop the other teams would take off after 10 seconds. The winner is the lead runner who is farthest ahead after a certain amount of time. And I can't wait to see how they cheat here, Frankie muttered bitterly. As the Straw Hats came onto the field, they were forced to watch Foxy's team, which consisted of Foxy as the coach, Porch, Chi-Chi-Cheetah who was a half-man, half-cheetah hybrid, Mashikaku who was a huge and rectangular man with thin arms and moved like a tank, and 2 fishmen named Jube and Gararan. Already cheating? Brook asked as he looked to the cheetah. That was hardly fair. Why are you surprised? Nami sighed as Chi-Chi-Cheetah suddenly came over and began to sniff Luffy curiously. Ah, what? Frankie asked. Luffy ate a kiwi earlier, Sanji muttered. Some kiwis can act like catnip, and cheetahs are still cats. Ah, Frankie said again, only in understanding this time. Anyway, Memory Sanji was acting as the coach for the Straw Hats and came up with the plan. Luffy would be the racer for the first and last rounds, Nami would be second, Usopp was going third, and Robin was fourth. But just as this was decided, Zoro demanded to know just who made him in charge. Well, we can't leave it up to Luffy, can we? The current Sanji asked. Huh, Memory Sanji asked, because the coach is the one who makes all the decisions, not the manager, and I'm the coach. And how come you get to have the awesome job and while I get stuck following your stupid orders? Zoro yelled at him. Present-day Zoro nodded firmly at that. He hated taking orders from just anyone, let alone that crappy cook. Obviously because I'm a genius and your brain is so rotten you're growing mold on your head, Sanji answered as if it was obvious. If you think you're a genius then your ego is as twisted as your eyebrow, Zoro snapped back. What did you say? The current Zoro and Sanji yelled at each other, looking ready to tear the other apart. Knock it off you guys. Chopper called in a pleading tone as they all were growing frustrated with their antics. Can't you all just agree that this happened over 2 years ago? Robin offered and they both just ended up looking away from the other, both steaming at the collar. Once the fighting was out of the way, they sat back to watch. But just as the game went underway, they all found out the hard way that Luffy couldn't skate, which led to the others telling Luffy to hold his breath while they kicked him around the ring as an inflated balloon. But just as they reached the finish line, one of the fishmen knocked him off the track and into the stands, so he was out. You think that he would have mentioned that he never skated before, Brook said, trying to think back, but realizing that in none of the memories they'd seen up till now, Luffy was never seen even touching a pair of skates. That moron didn't think it was going to be that hard, Sanji sighed. But I'll say this much for him, he's a quick learner. The second round wasn't any better, in fact, they didn't even get a chance to skate. Mashikaku, who was as fast as a turtle, was racing for them, and it looked like it was going to be an easy win. At least until Porch pulled out a baton and performed some kind of trick so that the memory blacked out. What happened? Brook cried out. What did she do? I think it was a form of hypnotism, Robin answered. I don't remember anything but waking up after that. You mean, she put all of you to sleep? Frankie asked them. That was awful, Chopper said, having been the only one who had seen what happened. You all just collapsed and I wanted to go down and treat you until they were all telling me that you were all asleep. But he trailed off before he could add the heart-wrenching news that they told him that he couldn't do anything for them even if they were hurt. He wasn't part of their crew anymore, so he was given orders not to treat them. He sighed miserably at that as he sat back, waiting for the new memory to pop up. That was awful, to think that his crew were hurt and not able to do anything. Regardless of the rules here, he meant every word from before. He was the doctor of the Straw Hat Pirates and Luffy was his captain. And no matter what happened, that wasn't ever gonna change. So, while you guys were all out, that big guy went around the track. Brook said, slowly understanding what happened. How is that fair? Weren't you paying attention? Zoro asked in annoyance as the memory came back and they were all on the track with the race over. These guys play to win. They don't care about what they have to do to get there. Even if it means some dirty tricks. This is just stupid. Frankie yelled as Memory Zoro was giving Luffy some pointers on how to stand up and skate. I didn't take you one for a skater, Robin laughed a little as she watched. I don't skate, but I know how it works, he answered in annoyance. But in the end all I did was tell Luffy to just watch and copy what everyone else did. Oh, so that's how he learned so quickly, Usopp said, thinking it over. Because he couldn't even keep up at first, but in the end he was going just as fast as Cheetah Boy. Round 3 was starting up, and as Usopp took off, Cheetah took off so quickly that he had already lapped the track before the defense even left. But to their amazement, Luffy was on his feet and awkwardly went off so fast that he was able to keep up with him. "You go, Luffy." Frankie cheered on as the announcer called out in amazement, and the Cheetah Boy was now forced to start running on all 4 legs. They were neck and neck with each other, but as they neared a turn, Luffy went flying up and out of the ring. "Oh crap, I taught him how to stand and skate, but not how to turn." Zoro moaned, remembering that. "But he's gotten better," Brook pointed out as the memory quickly came back to see that Luffy was up in the hole that he made in the fence when he went flying out. But he was staring at the rest of the racers with wide and focused eyes, especially on Cheetah. He left the course, his tail holding onto the fence, and swung down quickly that it doubled his speed. "Shouldn't that count as leaving the track?" Frankie demanded. "The air is safe, so it doesn't count," Sanji said bitterly. "Oh, so they say." Just as it was looking like they were going to lose the race, Memory Sanji was screaming up at Tanjit, demanding to know where he got the kiwi he gave Luffy before the game began. Once Tanjit called back that they grow in the trees behind them, Sanji then barked at Zoro to get a branch of it and bring it back to them. In the end, Zoro rode Shelly out of the stands into the fields. "What does this have to do with anything?" Frankie yelled. "Wait for it," Sanji added as Memory Usopp was just about to lose the race. Just as time was almost up, the giant tree fell into the stadium from where Zoro had hacked down the tree, and Cheetah was now out of the race when he was distracted by the kiwis and went out of bounds. Which left Usopp the winner. "Kiwis have special properties," Sanji answered with a smile as he watched them. "I told you before, right? They act like catnip, thought it was worth a shot." "Brilliant, Sanji-san," Brook called happily. Thank you," he called as Zoro rolled his eyes. Though he was man enough to admit that the cook did have one good idea, he'd cut his tongue out before he admitted it out loud. The announcer called as soon as the tree was out, they would start round 4. They watched by the side of the track as Memory Zoro pulled Luffy to the course again and was telling him how to turn, but Luffy just smiled. "Don't worry, I got it," he said confidently. "What do you mean you got it?" Past Zoro repeated. "You didn't have it a second ago." "Look, I did what you told me to do," Luffy said. "I watched how everyone else was skating, I'm ready." And he was right. He truly was a fast learner. The race started and Robin was already off with the fishman Jube on her heels. But when Luffy was able to take off, he was skated perfectly, and when he reached the bend, he ended up copying what Cheetah had done and stretched his arm out and used the momentum to catch up to the others before he took out Jube. "Wow, it's like he's been skating for years." Frankie laughed as Luffy called after Robin to keep going and that he'd handle this guy. It was a real race now. Even with the other 2 players trying to block her, Robin was easily able to get around them both. And Porch was no longer a threat since Memory Nami also managed to steal her baton so that she couldn't put the team back to sleep. The worst part was when Foxy tried to cheat once again using his slow beam to stop her. However, Memory Usopp and Nami alternated yelling out insults and compliments at him to keep him distracted between joy and sorrow. With him in the shape he was in, Robin ended up winning the race easily. "That worked like a charm," Zoro muttered, and they all nodded with him. "That made me sick to my stomach, you know." Nami shuddered at the memory of yelling out how great Foxy was. "Why couldn't you be the one to compliment him?" "Hey, there's not exactly many nice things to say about the guy." He shrugged. "I don't know what you wanted from me. But hey, it all worked out in the end, didn't it? We won this whole fight by the skins of our teeth," Sanji whispered as they watched them go into the last round. With 2 wins and 2 losses on each side, this was the big deciding winner, and now Luffy was going against the fishman Gararan. Right off the bat, Foxy used his beam to try and hit Luffy, but he was also wearing earplugs as well so that Usopp and Nami's words didn't work on him like last time. Luffy was able to dodge the beams for a while, before Memory Sanji yelled out that the beam didn't work on Gararan. "Huh, why is that?" Brook yelled in surprise. "Remember when he used that giant mirror ball back when you met him?" Robin asked. "You can reflect the beam with something like a mirror. Because of those blades on the end of his arms, Gararan is able to deflect them." "I see," Brook said in understanding, but then Gararan was able to use to his advantage as he deflected the beam towards Luffy in front of him. Robin's warning came too late and Luffy was slowed down. Now only Robin was freed. With 30 seconds remaining until the end of the round, she surprised everyone by coming right off the track. "I couldn't figure out how taking yourself out of the game was helping," Usopp told her, and she laughed. "It was all I could think of to win," she told them, and her past self showed them what she was talking about. Once Luffy was freed of the beam's effect and went off, Memory Robin used her ability to hold Foxy's hands from doing the beam a second time, forcing them back and eventually forcing him to slow himself down. "Let's see how he likes it," Usopp said smugly as the other Foxy pirates tried to stop Robin, but Memory Zoro intimidated them enough to get them to back off, allowing Luffy to overtake his opponent and win the round. Despite losing in the beginning, the Straw Hats managed to turn the game around and win Chopper back. Alright, Frankie cheered on. You did it. What a great way to end the game. You do end it right. He added with a quick look to the others, only to see that none of them were celebrating. No, and you can thank Luffy for that, Sanji muttered in annoyance. What are you talking about? Brook asked in shock. I mean, you all won. All 3 games are over and you got Shelly and Chopper back. What's the problem? It seemed as though he was proven right when Memory Chopper didn't need to be told twice to come back when Luffy called him over. Chopper jumped down and ran over to him crying, ripping off his mask and jumped into Luffy's arms. I was so scared. He cried out, I'm so happy you won. Are you kidding? Luffy asked him beaming. A bunch of suckers like that could never beat my crew. Which is why they resort to such dirty tricks. Zoro nodded as the announcer called that the Davy back fight was over, and since they reclaimed Chopper, he stated that the match ended in a draw. No, you got 2 back, Brook pointed out. And you did win 2 out of 3 matches. It wasn't a draw. Not everyone seemed to agree with that, however. Hold it, hold it, hold it. Foxy suddenly yelled and they all spun around to look at him. Any captain worth his weight in seaweed knows that there are no draws in the pirate world. It's plunder or be plundered. You won't let it end like this, will you? Oh, shut up. Current Usopp moaned out. How he wished that these Davy back fight memories would just end, they were driving him crazy. But that was when Luffy agreed to another set of 3 matches against the Foxy Pirates. Naturally, Usopp and Nami beat him up, and he promised that he wouldn't do it again. Won't do much good if you lose your crewmates during these fights, Frankie muttered. Luffy just can't refuse a challenge, Zoro sighed as the memory faded. I mean, he already agreed, so it's not like we could back out of it. But what was the point of it all? Brook asked. I mean, you won. There shouldn't have to be a reason for you to fight. Was there someone else he wanted from Foxy? There was something he did want, Sanji said, remembering how Luffy chose to take the flag. Could it be that was what he had been after from the start? Soon, they were back on another field that reminded them of the groggy game, only now there were 2 spiked balls. With our second Davy back fight about to start, I'm back in the announcer's seat to explain the rules of our first match. The announcer yelled. What's the point of having rules if they don't follow them? Chopper whispered. Yeah, and I thought for sure that this game was going to be fair, Sanji said, since they had no choice but to follow the rules, but shows what I know, right? The announcer then called, the name of the game is Hidden Dead Ball. The balls in question are the 2 you see on the field right now. If the opposing team hits you with one of those 2 babies, you're out of the game. The teams are divided into on-court and off-court members. They're free to choose which members go where and what number. Once you're out of on-court members, you're out of the match. Keep in mind that though the off-court members can throw the ball around like everyone else, they're not allowed to enter the court under any circumstance. So all these cute games have been turned deadly, Brook said. Well, dodgeball is a dangerous game normally anyway, yo-ho-ho-ho. They make it sound all fancy, Memory Sanji said, but it just sounds like regular old dodgeball to me. That was when the announcer tossed the rulebook over to them, one so thick that Robin had to grow an extra pair of arms out of her own to hold onto it as they stared at the thick book. You're kidding me, that's the rulebook. How can there be that many rules in dodgeball? Frankie asked. All you have to do is throw the ball. If the ball hits you, you're out, right? How complicated can it get? You'll see, Zoro said dully. What's the point of preaching to us about the rules if you're just gonna break them all anyway? Memory Nami demanded. Did you just give us the rulebook so we'll know how bad you're cheating? Now, the announcer called in a smug way. Take a look at the first page, mademoiselle. Robin did so and read out, referee regulations. He who makes a judgment contrary to the rules written here will be beheaded on the spot. So they have no choice but to follow the rules. Frankie said as Memory Chopper yelled out in shock at the idea of losing your head. Didn't stop them, Chopper whispered to himself. The entire Straw Hat crew, with Nami and Robin on the sidelines, participates in this game as does the entire Foxy crew. For the initial jump ball, Luffy and Chopper, in jump point form, snag the ball, and both manage to slam it into Foxy's face. However, according to rule number 23, the face is safe. Memory Nami then handed the ball off to Zoro and Sanji, who managed to take out 9 people each. 18 in 2 shots. Brook said in an impressed voice, especially seeing how many people you're up against. Impressive. During this time, Memory Robin was sitting at the sidelines, reading the rule book, but still managed to snag the ball and hand it off to Luffy and Chopper. Luffy knocks 10 players out of bound, and his ball was picked up by the Foxy team. Chopper then threw his ball in arm point, but Hamburg manages to stop his teammates from going out of bounds, and hands both balls to Big Pan. The first ball gets dodged by everyone on the Straw Hat team, except for Usopp, hitting him on the shoulder, along with 22 players from the Foxy team. This leaves the Foxy team with only 2 players left, Foxy and Hamburg. That hit did more harm to his own team than to you guys. Frankie yelled out. His strength ended up being used against them, Zoro said coolly. Well, you should have this game in the bag then, Frankie offered, before noticing the sour looks on their faces, and he groaned. You lost. How could you lose? Just shut up, Zoro said in annoyance. As the two discuss how to win, Memory Robin used her powers to drop the ball on Hamburg's head. At first, it seems Hamburg is out, but one of the refs declare that the top of the head is safe. Robin counters this, saying that on page 103 of the rulebook, rule number 54 states that the top of the head is out, leaving Foxy as the last remaining member on the field. You got him there, Robin. Usopp cheered as the others shook their heads at all the rules there were. I'm surprised that ref tried to say he was safe when he knew that he could end up losing his head, Frankie stated. I guess he wasn't thinking. Nami offered. However, things went downhill from there. All the girls on Foxy's crew seduced Sanji into giving up the ball and he was so distracted that he got knocked out. Moron, Zoro muttered. I can turn my back on beautiful women, Sanji sighed dreamily, staring at Porch and all the other ladies. I'm in love. Nami just rolled her eyes, knowing that was a bad habit of their cooks and hoped that they could do something about that. After all, he almost was killed back at Eni's lobby because of his stupid chivalry. And they would have won the next game if it wasn't for his and Zoro's stupidity here. At this point, Foxy brings out his hidden dead ball multi-item with the dead hit cannon. What? Frankie yelled out, messing up his hair, as he fought the urge to pull it out. I'm losing my mind here. I don't know how much more of this madness I can take. He sat back onto the grass and said in a whimper, these guys are driving me crazy. Welcome to our world, Usopp muttered, they all deserve each other. I don't see how anyone else can put up with them. Memory Usopp tried to contest against that thing, only to be told by Robin and the chief referee that it's allowed. Trying to psych out the Straw Hats, Portia pretends to hypnotize the team, having them close their eyes in defense, only for Foxy to shoot the ball at Zoro. This does not succeed and Zoro cuts the ball in half with his hands, disqualifying him under rule number 645, the ball may not be cut, giving Foxy a new ball. Dude, how many rules are there? Frankie asked shaking his head. But now there was only Luffy and Chopper on their side of the field. Luffy had one ball and Foxy had the other. Chopper took a big risk and ended up eating another rumble ball and goes into guard point, but gets hit by the ball ricocheting off an audience's belly while protecting Luffy. Way to take one for the team, Chopper, Zoro said as there became a fight, trying to figure out if Chopper was safe or out. Though he was hit in the face, he was still out of bounds, and so was disqualified. I forgot how hard it was to control my transformations, Chopper muttered as he watched. Was it really that hard for you? Brook asked curiously. In those days I needed the rumble ball for my transformations, remember? Chopper asked. He remembered how closely he had to monitor how many times he had to take them. If he took 2 within 6 hours, then he lost control of his transformations. Even here, he didn't have much control. Thankfully he was able to master his transformations so that he didn't have to depend on the rumble ball so much anymore. Now the game was down to Foxy versus Luffy, when suddenly all the Foxy pirates pull out fake balls. Sanji and Usopp question the ref, only to be dismissed saying that there is no rule against using fake balls. Well, there should be. Current Usopp yelled as Luffy winds up to throw the ball he had, but he stretched his arm too far and the ball was taken out of his hand. The Foxy pirates start shuffling the real ball behind their back, preventing Luffy from knowing which is the real ball. At this, everyone launches their balls at Luffy, who catches every single one of them, but then gets hit in the face by the ball shot from Foxy's robot. Luffy swallows the ball, which is against the rules, which costs them the win. As a result, Robin is taken from the crew. His habit of biting down anything that enters his mouth got us into trouble here, Nami sighed. I don't see why he bites at all, Usopp muttered, I mean he just inhales food without chewing most of the time. They wanted you, Robin-san. Brook asked in surprise, turning back to their archaeologist. He had thought for sure that they would take Chopper back. I guess they thought they'd have a better chance of winning the next game if they took me, Robin answered. Sanji, Luffy, Usopp, and Chopper sobbed out as she merely smiled and walked towards Foxy's crew, with a wave of her hand. You don't seem too bothered by it, Frankie muttered to her and she shrugged. I feel her pain. Memory Sanji sobbed as he bit down on a handkerchief. She's trying to hide her sorrow behind that beautiful smile. She hates being apart from me. How dare they take my sweet Robin away? Even if it's the rules, do they know nothing about love? You did miss me, didn't you, Robin? The present-day Sanji asked her, I'm so sorry for making you wait. Don't worry, it's all in the past, Robin smiled as she watched herself merely put on the mask and sat down as the men from Foxy's crew gathered around and swooned over her. If she had to be honest with herself, she had been terrified, but not of the fact that they might not win her back, but at the thought of being separated from them. Though she had only spent a short time with them, she had grown attached to each of them. And the realization that she had grown to care about them, that she had somehow, despite all her best efforts, saw them as her home and felt a sense of belonging with them had scared her more than anything else here. The only reason she was able to survive up to this point in her life was because she never let herself to bond to anyone else, but somehow the Straw Hats did what no one else could. They melted her heart of ice and wormed their way inside a warm and beating one. And that thought had scared her more than anything else. Thankfully, she was soon brought out of her contemplations when the memory changed around and found that they were back at the coast with two long reefs that acted as roads up a small mountain. One road was pretty much a smooth pathway all the way up, while the other twisted and crossed. Naturally, the Straw Hats were on that one and even Frankie and Brooke could guess what this meant. Round 2 will be held on the long reef. The announcer yelled as he rode on the back of his usual giant bird, but what got some people's attention was that Tanjit was behind him. The game will be Dash, Touch, Domination. Or DTD for short. Although this is a 6-on-6 competition, the absence of Nico Robin forces the Straw Hats to compete with only 5 players. The rules are simple. They all shook their heads, knowing that they could all pretty much forget about those things by this point. Basically the game is played the way as red light, green light. The announcer yelled, whoever moves even the tiniest little bit after the light stops calling is out. Whoever touches the stoplight at the top of the reef first will be declared the winner. But this is no kid's game. Remember, when pirates play red light, green light, they play hard and they play to win. Most pirates don't play red light, green light, Frankie whispered, and they all felt the need to bang their heads at what they were hearing. But they brightened at the memory that this was the second to last game. They were all willing to move on from this moment in their lives. The use of weapons are approved and encouraged. The announcer yelled, this is what makes DTD a truly perilous game. Playing for the Straw Hat team is, the same boring lineup as always. Shut it, jerk. They all screamed up. Now they were just getting mean. Current Nami sighed as she sat back up on the cliff beside Luffy and Shelly, who were watching the game eagerly. The announcer went on to introduce the Foxy team, which was made up of Porch, Hamburg, Pickles, Chichichita, Capto from the Donut Race, and Big Pan. And last, but not least, the role of our stoplight will be played by none other than the Nomad Tanjit. The announcer finished up. This great fool, man of bravery, stood on stilts for 10 years and touched the heavens. This makes him the logical choice to stand on top of the reef and make him it. I hate to agree with him calling the old man a fool, but Sanji said before he trailed off. We all know the feeling, Usopp sighed. Yes, but this is a good thing, isn't it? Brook asked them, don't you have an advantage here? The old gentleman is on your side, right? Yes, but there's only so much that he could help us out here, Sanji answered as they heard the Foxy pirates around them asking Foxy if this was alright. Foxy only laughed confidently, saying that this was nothing. If their crew was strong enough to battle the Grand Line, then this game was child's play. He didn't just say that, did he? Usopp sighed as Foxy's crew cheered at that. However, Memory Nami seemed to have heard him and yelled up, child's play. Then why did you give us this unfair, jacked up course giving you the advantage from the start? Foxy's crew all stopped and looked to see that they couldn't deny that. I guess using the to-do beam really is his only talent, Memory Sanji stated sarcastically, and Chopper and Usopp added to the insults as well. Hearing so much verbal abuse at once was too much for Foxy to take in and immediately became depressed, seemingly sinking several inches into the dirt. If he hates being called split head, why not just change his hair? Zoro asked in annoyance. Well, he's not exactly the sharpest knife in the drawer, is he? Sanji asked. The race started and, of course, Chichichita was up in front with Porch riding on Hamburg's back. The three of them managed to stay in the lead as Sanji and Zoro ran up behind, arguing the whole way, but then Pickles and Big Pan tried to get rid of them by throwing a large boulder at them. Watch out. Brook couldn't help but call out. But he didn't need to worry. Just as Tanjit finished was about to turn around, the two sliced the boulder and sent it back at Pickles and Pan, who were sent flying and out of the game. When Tanjit had turned back around, they all started running again and Robin suddenly asked, Chopper, why didn't you turn to your walk point? I'm sure you could have caught up to them. Chopper blinked before he blushed. I didn't think about that, he muttered to himself in embarrassment, and they all chuckled at that. But not nearly as much as when they looked back to see that Memory Zoro had gotten lost on the pathway and Sanji lost his temper. How the hell could anyone get lost on a path like this one? You can see the old man at the end of it. Even your sense of direction can't be that bad. Memory Sanji screamed down at him. Were you dropped on your head when you were a baby or something? The current Sanji asked him. I just don't see how it's even possible to get lost like this. Zoro slugged him and soon they started up their usual fight, but the others weren't even bothering to pay attention as they watched. Memory Sanji's gamble of taking a series of stones across to catch up to the others paid off. He ended up right behind the others as Capto began chasing Nami, Usopp, and Chopper to make sure that they had an even less chance of catching up. It was then they realized that Tanjit was sleeping and everyone began yelling at him to wake up. What kind of person falls asleep, leaning up against a rock like that? Sanji asked, exasperated. Well, how else did he sleep while up in the sky for 10 years? Nami offered as Tanjit jerked away, and turned around. As soon as he looked, Capto jumped into the air, taken by surprise, and unable to stop. He was taken out. Only 3 more people to knock out and then the path's clear. Frankie cheered, but as they started running again, Hamburg and Sanji were forced to fight each other as Chichichita raced on ahead. Chichichita was nearly able to touch Tanjit, and secure a win for his team. However, just he was about to touch Tanjit, the old man suddenly turned around and sneezed at Chichichita. With Tanjit's extremely long snot covered all over his face, Chichichita was so repulsed that he had to wipe the gunk off his face. Tanjit, seeing Chichichita move as he wiped his face, immediately tagged him out of the game. "That is disgusting," Nami shivered, not blaming Chichichita from trying to get it off. "Wow, even his snot was long," Usopp said with a sweat drop. "You mean that he hadn't even started the game up again? That he was only starting to sneeze?" Brook asked, not sure of what to think here. "Yeah, but hey, that saved them. Now there's only 2 more people." Frankie cheered on. Tanjit turned around and began calling his line again. Memory Sanji raced on ahead, using Hamburg as like a springboard. He took off and jumped ahead as Hamburg and Porch were stumbling around near the edge. Everyone was cheering for him, and as Sanji had just made it to Tanjit, he heard Porch's scream and turned back to jump after her and landed in the water. "What was that?" Zoro yelled at him, having not seen that happening while he was trying to find a way back up the stupid reef. "She may be the enemy, but I cannot ignore a lady in distress," Sanji said firmly. "You could have at least touched the old man before you did." Usopp yelled at him. "There was time." "Sorry, but the ladies must always come first," Sanji said dramatically. "Yeah, and Robin was counting on us to win here," Usopp reminded him, and Sanji's cool face was replaced with horror. "Oh, my dear Robin. I know that I blew it. I knew that I let you down, but I can't stop myself." Sanji said to her, "I was brought up to never mistreat a lady. And so, even if it's the enemy, even if it could cost me my life, I will never turn my back on a lady in need." "Wow, you're amazing, Sanji," Chopper called out with eyes wide. "That's so cool, Sanji-san," Brook said, in full agreement. The others weren't sure to laugh or not, but that didn't matter, for they heard a splash. They looked up to see Tanjit looking back at the players, with Hamburg hanging onto the ledge with on hand, and Sanji came up with Porch but seemed to be holding completely still. "How can he be standing out there like that?" Foxy asked in amazement. "There's no way he's touching the bottom." "That's what I want to know," Brook said, just staring at Sanji seemingly standing there. But it was the announcer who explained it for them. "I get it," he called loudly from above them. "He's treading water, and he's doing it while carrying Porch and keeping his upper body completely motionless." "You've got to be kidding me," Frankie said in surprise. Robin laughed. "Very impressive, Sanji," she smiled, and he swooned. "Why, thank you, Robin dear." "It was until the dope stopped," Usopp whispered. And like that, with everyone cheering Sanji on, Porch kissed his cheek as a thank you, and he lost his concentration, which made them both sink. "Well, that was a bit of a letdown," Nami said, as Sanji sighed. If only Porch waited a few more seconds, though he was sure that he could have won her heart over. She was so cute. But he wasn't the real problem, current Nami hissed, shooting Zoro a very nasty look. "What?" he asked in annoyance. Rather than answer, she pointed down at the reef. With everyone but Hamburg taken out, Nami, Usopp, and Chopper had finally caught up and were heading straight up to touch Tanjit, at least until Zoro ruined it by kicked Hamburg out of his way and up to Tanjit, where they ended up losing the game. "You mean you kicked Hamburg up there and lost the game for everyone?" Frankie asked as Brook fell over in shock. "What the hell were you thinking? He was in my way." Zoro snapped. "Couldn't you have kicked him out to COR something?" Usopp yelled at him as the cannons went off, signaling the end of the game, and the memory Straw Hats went back to shore to face the music. Knowing his sense of direction, he probably did meant to kick him out that way, but ended up going the wrong way as always, Sanji stated as the two started up their fight again in anger. Luffy, however, was looking at the bright side of their loss. "That's alright," he said as he cracked his knuckles together. "It doesn't matter, I'm up next. The captain's gonna win his crew back, no problem." "Yeah, take him out, Luffy." Frankie cheered before he realized something. If they could only take one person back, and there was only one more game to play. Foxy had just come over with a smug look on his face. "Haven't you forgotten an important little fact, Straw Hat?" he asked them. "That was your second loss. So in addition to Nico Robin, you're about to lose one more member of your crew. On top of that, you can only take back one crew member per event. Therefore, even in the slimmest, most inconceivable chance, that you win the next round." "He talks too much," Chopper said softly as Luffy said darkly, "Come on. Get to the point, split head." "What he's trying to say, Captain," Memory Robin said as Foxy fell to his knees again in misery, "is that there's only one more round remaining, so even if you win it, you can only take back one person." "But, wait, that means..." Brook gasped. Luffy stared as Foxy got back to his feet and proclaimed, "So it doesn't matter what does or doesn't happen in the next round, the fact remains, you already lost one of your crewmates forever." "But that can't be right." Frankie yelled as Foxy retook Chopper, who was crying into Memory Robin's shirt as she whispered comforting words to him. "I mean, all of you are here. Desperate times call for desperate measures," Nami shrugged. "We just needed one more game to pull it off." The Memory Straw Hats were all gathered together, trying to figure out what they could do now. Luffy had the idea of having a third Davy back fight and win all 3 rounds. "That might work," Brook said, but then they heard Foxy come up again. He heard about their plan and refused, telling them that his crew was tired from all the Davy back fight games and that this next game would be the last no matter what they said. He said that his crew was the strongest, but he would be a fool to keep pushing them so far. The Straw Hats stared at him, as the present-day ones all shook their heads at that. Didn't Foxy realize that what he just said didn't make any sense? What? Foxy asked when he noticed the stunned expressions, so impressed you don't know what to say. You gotta be kidding me, Memory Zoro said. First you brag about how strong you were and then we're supposed to feel sorry for you. Yeah, I'm finding it hard to work up any kind of sympathy for this guy, current Usopp nodded. Poor Foxy, past Sanji said sarcastically, he's so strong he has to cheat to win. It's not his fault he challenged us. As Foxy mopped in the background, they gathered around, trying to figure out what they were going to do. Faced with this, Memory Nami made a desperate deal with Foxy, saying that if they couldn't have Chopper and Robin then there was no point in being a pirate crew. They were willing to make this game count for 5 people. So if Foxy did win, he could have the rest of the crew. She even came right out and said that Foxy didn't even have to risk 5 of his own crewmates. They were going to put it all on the line for those 2. A gutsy move, Frankie muttered as he sat back and watched. But it was the only way we could get him to agree on it, she answered back, we need everyone here to continue our journey as pirates. And I'm sure no one regrets this all or nothing risk, right? No, Sanji said confidently. The only downside was the idea of getting stuck with Foxy, Zoro sighed as Usopp nodded. And this is the last game, right? Frankie asked, I'm exhausted just watching this whole thing. I think we're all tired, Chopper said wearily. But I don't know how much longer we have to keep watching memories before we're out of this mess. I really want to go back to the sunny. Nami stepped forward. We all do. That's why you guys have to get to work and get Luffy back before we can get out of here. Why are you saying that? We have to do all the work. Usopp demanded. Foxy looked up and seemed to be thinking it over, glancing over her and the other 4 boys thoughtfully. Finally, he got up and said, yes. You have a deal. But what's the fun in only betting 2 crewmates? He smirked as he added softly, make it 500. 500. Brook cried out. He really was a first-rate idiot, Zoro said, finally bored with his fight with Sanji and they calmed down enough to come back over and listen. Foxy proclaimed that he was willing to risk 500 of his own men to the 2 that they asked for. What would we do with 500 people? Luffy asked with a frown, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I have to agree with that, Brook said angrily. What was Foxy thinking? Risking his entire crew like that? Who would do something like that? He could understand why the Straw Hats would do so, they were closer than most families were and had complete trust in their captain. But Foxy didn't seem to care about his own crewmates like that. Now you know he's an idiot if even Luffy could see that, Sanji muttered as his own past self and Usopp kicked Luffy to the ground and told him to shut up and not to ruin it for them when he had already agreed to the important part. But we couldn't fit 500 people on the Mary if we tried, Luffy retorted. It doesn't matter if it's 5 people or 500 people, Memory Sanji hissed, as long as we're able to get Robin and Chopper back. We were going to get you 2 back no matter what it took, Nami told them and Chopper felt his heart feel all warm inside as if he was wrapped in a comforting blanket. Luffy realized this as well and so he accepted it. But the announcer added that since their team didn't have 500 members to bet, they'd have to pay them back with their descendants if they lost. Say what? Frankie asked slowly. It's got to be the stupidest deal I've ever heard, Nami sighed. And the announcer explained that if they lost, then their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren and whoever else it takes to make 500 people will swear loyalty to the Foxy Pirates. The past Straw Hats all looked to each other, talking about it, but it was too late to turn back now as they agreed. This deal is insane. Who thinks up something like that? Present-day Zoro asked as Sanji dreamed if he had children with Nami and what they would look like. Naturally, they'd look just like their mother. Nothing about Foxy's crew makes sense, Usopp muttered. The memory that followed was of Foxy leading Luffy to a large cannon and the announcer calling out that they arrived at the combat round. But before they started, they needed to find a place to hold the battlefield. Wherever the cannon stopped would shot a cannonball, and wherever the ball landed would be their battlefield. And so both captains spun the cannon like they were playing a round of spin the bottle. The cannon had almost stopped spinning, before it spun the opposite way and pointed directly at Foxy's ship. The match hasn't even started yet, and you guys are already cheating. Memory Usopp screamed. Why would they want to try to sink their own ship? Frankie asked at once. Don't worry, Robin answered, they had plenty of shipwrights on their crew to repair the damage. They weren't worried. Still, Frankie frowned. They could show their ship a little bit of respect. The cannonball meanwhile landed right in the middle of the ship. The announcer then called that the sexy Foxy would be the battlefield. And everything within 50 meters of where the cannonball landed would be considered the arena. Weapons and anything else found inside the designated battlefield are allowed. Anything goes, however, outside crew members weren't allowed to enter the ship and help their captain. All that they had to do was knock their opponent so hard that they either stayed down or were knocked out of bounds. Whichever captain wins, wins everything, and the captain who loses will have lost everything. And the memory faded after that grim note. I just don't see why we let them get away with all this cheating, Chopper frowned, kicking a rock on the ground angrily. Sorry, but he could get away with cheating because he had the manpower, Zoro pointed out. He had the advantage from the start. There wasn't anything we could do but wait for Luffy to kick his ass. You know, I've always wondered just what Luffy went through down in the ship, Usopp said curiously. They both went to fight below deck and I've always wanted to know just what happened down there. I mean, I thought I could hear explosions going on, but we couldn't see anything. Looks like we're gonna find out one way or another, Sanji said as the images came back up. In the next memory they were on the deck of the Sexy Foxy, and stands had been built on land so that they could all watch what was going on. Strange though that the sky had grown dark all of a sudden. Some lights shined up onto the dark clouds where a projection of the captain's wanted posters were. Luffy's 100 million to Foxy's 24 million. Hopefully, this is gonna be a good fight, Frankie smirked. We have a real treat ladies and gentlemen. The announcer yelled, a captain versus captain showdown. Everyone cheered as he turned and yelled, first. In the left corner we have a reigning Davy back champion. A man among men who never turns down a challenge, and holds the most legendary combat record. Our one and only boss, Silver Fox Foxy. Boo. Usopp, Chopper, Frankie, and Sanji all yelled, giving Foxy the thumbs down. Through the mist and lights, Foxy appeared from the left ear of the fox figurehead, threw off his cloak and stood there with bright blue boxing gloves and his crew all screamed and whistled. Oh no, current Nami groaned, knowing what was going to happen next. The boys were going to embarrass them all again. And in the right corner, the announcer went on, more fog and lights were coming up right of them and two figures were coming up the stairs from the right ear, our challenger. At the introduction, Memory Usopp and Luffy both came up. Usopp was dressed in a manager's outfit and Luffy walking beside him with a white sheet over his head so that they could only see his face. Why does everyone have to be so dramatic here? Nami sighed as they stood back as Luffy walked towards the front. Hailing from the East Blue with a tiny crew of only 7 and a massive 100 million berry bounty on his head, the rebel wonder they call Straw Hat, the announcer yelled, Monkey D. Luffy. And he flung the cloth off him to show that he was wearing a large afro, similar to Brook's, on his head, dark red shorts and red bandages on his feet as well as images of a blue flaming skull and crossbones painted on his chest. Brook let out a cry of joy, you could practically see the sparkle in his eyes, not that he had eyes, and he was cheering louder than anyone. So funky. Memory Sanji yelled over the sounds of the cheering crowds, I can feel it like a fire in my soul. Luffy looks so awesome. Chopper cried out and Robin laughed right beside him and Frankie was beaming as he struck a pose, calling out his catchphrase at the sight of a boxing Luffy. Usopp is definitely a bad influence on Luffy, Zoro sighed. Afro Luffy. And I thought Water Luffy was pathetic. Hey now, don't underestimate the power of the afro. Usopp yelled loudly. Here, Brook said proudly, patting his own hair fondly. It was his greatest treasure after all, the only thing that didn't rot away with the rest of him. And he admitted that the afro did have a power all its own. I never understood what you were all talking about here, Nami whispered. Can one of you tell me just what afro power is? I mean, just having an afro doesn't make you stronger or anything. Shows how much you know, Usopp said as the battle was getting underway. After some pre-battle formalities between the two, the match between Foxy and Luffy began. Usopp and the announcer, as well as Foxy's backup, were all forced to leave the ship, and the stands slowly rose up into the air so that they could get a full view of everything that was going on. These guys may be jerks, but I have to admit, they're pretty good builders, Frankie said with a slight nod. Luffy watched in great interest at the moving stands before Foxy spoke up. Now then, Luffy. What do you say we have some fun? This whole ship is our playground after all. Feel free to go as wild as you want. Don't worry, we have plenty of skilled shipwrights to clean up after our mess. Frankie frowned at that. Even if that's the case, they could at least try to take care of their ship. Knowing how strong Luffy was, he could easily sink this whole thing. Even with the best shipwrights around, they can't fix a ship that sinks to the bottom of the ocean. The announcer flew around above them on the back of the bird, calling for the match to begin. They heard the sound of a bell ring, and Luffy started off by throwing a fist, but Foxy was able to slow his arm. Luffy was dragged across the figurehead, and Foxy acted like he was about to use that beam another time, which tricked Luffy into jumping out of the way, only for Foxy to hit him when he jumped, and this time he was hit. He's frozen in the air. Chopper yelled out, remembering this. I guess even in the air his fall is slow, Sanji said angrily as Foxy jumped up on top of him and began to punch away. That's nuts, he's not budging. Frankie yelled. No, look closer, Zoro said, he is moving, but it's all in slow motion. That's dirty. Fighting someone who can't even defend himself. Usopp snarled angrily, and he thought watching it all from the stands was a bad view. Once Foxy jumped down, and the 30 seconds were up, the punches all finally hit and Luffy was slammed head over heels on the fox's head before he was knocked off. Thankfully, Luffy stretched out and rocketed back up as his feet just barely touched the water. That was too close for comfort, Nami sighed in relief. Now angry, Luffy was glaring around and ended up kicking one of the fox's ears off as he screamed for Foxy to come back out. He jumped over the figurehead into the deck where there were arrows hovering in midair waiting for him. Luffy just barely registered what was going on before he fell backwards to avoid them. Luffy doesn't do well against tricksters, does he? Robin asked, already knowing the answer. Nope, Zoro said, he's too straightforward and honest. Like Ace said, he falls for every trap laid out in front of him. The battle went on with Foxy slowing down some cannonballs and stood on top of one as he hovered in the air. Luffy thought that he could step on them as well, however as he jumped to one, it moved out of the way and he fell. He stretched up to grab another cannonball to keep him from falling, but that one ended up moving and he was slammed into the deck. Suddenly, the cannonballs were shooting everywhere in all directions. It went on for about a minute before all the cannonballs had finished firing and the deck was half destroyed. Luffy was pulling himself out of some rubble. This sucks. What's his problem anyway? He asked himself. If he keeps this up he's gonna sink his own ship. That's what I was saying. Frankie yelled out, why not just be a man and fight with his fists, for crying out loud. I'll sink you first. Foxy screamed from the upper deck as he lowered a strange-shaped cannon, slow Foxy face bomb cannon. Foxy uses a cannon to fire several bombs shaped like his face towards an opponent and slows them all down with his devil fruit power. What is that? Sanji yelled out as some of the Straw Hats fell over in shock. Ah, creepy. Luffy screamed out as the laughing heads came towards him. I'm with you there, Usopp said, those heads were creeping him out. Hey, Chopper yelled out, where'd Foxy go? Hiding amongst the bombs, Foxy got closer to Luffy without him noticing while he was distracted by all the laughing bombs. His boxing gloves were suddenly spiked and he hit Luffy when his back was turned and they saw the bombs go off. Luffy, Chopper screamed out in worry. They couldn't see anything through the smoke, but they were all forced to cover their ears over the impact of the multiple noise. After several chaos-filled minutes, the explosions died out, but there was still so much smoke that they couldn't see anything. But as it cleared, they heard the announcer freak out above them and they looked to see that Luffy was up out of harm's way, having rocketed up to the highest point on the mast before the bombs went off. He made it. Brook cried out happily, thank goodness. He had me worried there for a while, Usopp said with a smile. I don't get it, Nami said, how'd he get up there? He was down and the bombs went off around him. When'd he get up to the mast? I saw it, Zoro said and Sanji nodded with him. He rocketed up there just a fraction of a second before the bombs went off. With all the smoke it was almost impossible to see him. Luffy then gracefully jumped back down to the deck and was staring around below them at all the smoke. They could hear Foxy laughing through the smoke, but when it cleared a little, they could see that he was burnt and injured. What happened? Frankie yelled out. That idiot. Did he get blown up by his own attack? Nami yelled. You got twice as blown up as me. Luffy yelled down at him. Shut up, I'm fine. See. LOOOOK. Foxy yelled back, trying to be threatening, only for smoke to billow out of his mouth. It's official, Zoro said, smacking his face with the palm of his hand. He has got to be the most annoying pirate I've ever met. And that's saying a lot. You don't look fine at all. Luffy screamed. I don't even want you on my crew anymore. Foxy decided, holding up his hands, I'd rather just crush you. Foxy shot another slow beam at him, but Luffy easily jumped down behind him and punched him in the back. I'm gonna break your arm so you can't use that dumb beam. Luffy yelled as Foxy ran into the remains of the thick smoke to hide. Not a bad idea, Sanji agreed, but just then, the cheater started putting up a bunch of cutouts in his shape and was putting them up around Luffy, taunting him into guessing who the real one was. It shouldn't be hard, Brook said at once. He was able to find that Mr. Three Fellow back at Little Garden right. How should I know? Luffy yelled out, they all look the same. Just a bunch of split heads with stupid looking haircuts. Oh, he got him there, Zoro laughed, and sure enough, those words ended up depressing Foxy. Luffy spotted him on the ground and went for a punch. You jerk, Foxy screamed as he sat up, I may be a cheater but at least I have a heart. You're in for it now. A heart? You're kidding right, Sanji sighed. Foxy then tricked Luffy into looking up before opening up a trap door beneath him that ended up taking him to the other end of the ship and almost dumped him into the sea. Once again, Luffy had been able to save himself by pulling himself back to the ship, and even Foxy's crew was cheering for him now. Come on, fight already. Stop using these stupid tricks and fight. Frankie yelled, but they found out that Foxy snuck below deck when Luffy was almost flung off the ship. Losing his temper completely, Luffy threw caution to the wind as he went running inside, ignoring Memory Nami's warning that it was a trap. This should be good, Usopp muttered sarcastically as they followed after him. They ran down a few flight of stairs behind Luffy until they ended up at the gun's deck and Luffy stared around. There were dozens of cannons and cannonballs, with barrels full of gunpowder lining the walls. Usopp was now almost drooling over it all. Wow, a gun deck, Luffy said to himself, it's huge too. Too bad Usopp's not here, he'd love this. I do, Usopp gasped out, his eyes wide. Hey Frankie, can you make me a room like this on the Sunny? I make no promises, bro, Frankie said as Luffy continued to look around for Foxy. The door behind him suddenly closed. He looked ready to run through before he noticed one of the bigger cannons and smirked. He isn't. Nami laughed. Oh, he is, Frankie burst out laughing as he watched Luffy load up the cannon and prepared to fire it. Well, the rules do say that anything's fair play, Robin pointed out, it's Foxy's fault for leading him down here. Luffy lit the fuse and blew the wall away to reveal Foxy hanging onto the giant cannonball right above the floor, which was filled with spikes. Where the hell did those come from? Sanji yelled. I think that it's just been built to trap people like Luffy, Robin answered, no wonder Foxy's never lost before. I'm guessing that he wanted to lure Luffy in and watch as him impaled himself. Robin, Usopp moaned in despair. He's giving me such a headache, Nami sighed, just hurry up and beat him Luffy. Foxy was furious that his plan was ruined and rolling on top of the giant cannonball he came barreling right towards him. Luffy avoiding the ball and Foxy's spiked fist before he went running away. No way, Luffy yelled angrily, come back and fight me. For someone who claims to be undefeatable, he sure does a lot of running, Sanji hissed in annoyance. They ran down the stairs with Luffy until they were outside the infirmary. He burst in and they all stared to see that Foxy was wearing a pathetic mask and doctor's clothes. The sad thing was that Luffy couldn't tell it was him. But he wasn't the only one. Where'd Foxy go? Chopper asked and they all felt sweat drop around their heads at the innocent expression on Chopper's face. But they didn't say anything as Luffy walked out of the room. Wait, Luffy suddenly cried, that weird lady. She looked just like him. I get it. And he gets it, Usopp said with a sigh, but when Luffy charged back in, he yelled, hey. You must be Foxy's sister. You can't fool me. Usopp and Nami both fell to their knees at that. I knew it, Chopper yelled out as Robin laughed and the two on the ground fell a little more at that. But instead of Foxy they were met with a large, metal fox head come out of nowhere and clamped down on Luffy's face. As Luffy fell, Foxy turned and ran away. Luffy pulled the thing off him and threw it to the ground. Oh, so that's it. She lied to me so that I wouldn't find her brother. He turned and ran down the hall. Is he even trying to fight me anymore? While I can't agree with everything in that sentence, I do have to wonder if he is bothering to fight, Sanji muttered. He's trying to wear Luffy down with all these tricks, Robin answered. He seems to be trying to lure him in somewhere. This can't be good. They ran down several more flights of stairs and saw a sign that showed the kitchen. Luffy charged in as well to see Foxy there as well in another stupid mask. Nice kitchen, Sanji said, looking around at it in an impressed way. Now this was a kitchen that you could make delicious foods in. Not again with the dumb disguises, Nami whispered. Looks like Luffy's just as brain dead as before, Usopp added. Come on, how could you not notice what was going on here? Yeah, well, what else is new? Nami added sadly. Have you seen some old fox dude with his head split in two that looks really stupid and not cool? Luffy asked and Foxy couldn't take it as he fell forward in depression. You truly are heartless, he mumbled. Hey, it's you, Luffy yelled as Foxy tore off his outfit. Ha ha, and I was the woman in the doctor's office too. Foxy bragged. What? No way. Luffy and Chopper gasped out. You just need to focus a little and pay more attention to your surroundings, Chopper, Robin informed him and Chopper nodded firmly at that as the others all shook their heads, both of them were just too innocent. But Foxy had just hit with another slow beam and started punching him once again. He then calmly bragged as he went over to a metal door and pulled the switch next to it to open it. There was nothing but darkness inside. They waited the painful 30 seconds before Luffy was sent flying backwards and into the dark. They followed down the deep pit and looked around as they heard Foxy's voice laughing. Coughing and sitting up, Luffy was muttering, where'd he run off to now? How many rooms are on this ship? Brook whispered as Foxy's voice called out to look behind him. They looked behind them to see a pair of lights, like glowing eyes, flashed in Foxy's annoying laugh once again. Now what? Usopp yelled. The lights came on and Foxy was sitting right up on top of a gorilla-shaped platform, which sat on top of a large block full of boxing gloves. It was his masterpiece robot, the Gorilla Puncher 19. Makes me wonder what happened to the first 18, Robin wondered curiously. The only gorilla I see on it is you. Luffy yelled up at him. Burn, Frankie smirked. Foxy finally lost it as the giant machine began to move towards Luffy and the boxing gloves began to move and punch the air. You mean to tell me that he's pedaling? Frankie muttered noticing how Foxy was sweating to move the thing. I know it goes without saying, but this thing's got nothing on the General Frankie. No way, Usopp and Chopper agreed. That thing is beyond awesome. The two women both shared stony expressions, their eyebrows raised, but they didn't say anything as the two began to talk about how cool that Frankie's robot was. They supposed that it was just a boy thing to love robots. Foxy was sending more slow beams at Luffy, but were caught off guard when they saw him aiming directly over his head, as if he wasn't even trying to hit him. At least until they realized that there was a mirror the size of the room right behind Luffy. The beam bounced right off it and went directly towards him. Dodge it, Luffy, Usopp warned. Thankfully, Luffy had the sense to miss it, however he wasn't so lucky getting hit by one of the giant gloves instead. And as soon as the glove hit him, he ended up bursting right into flames. What kind of punch is that? Nami yelled as some of them cried out in shock. I knew something had to happen for Luffy to get burns like that. Luffy was being attacked by all sides. It was amazing that he was able to avoid the beams and boxing gloves, but he was quickly growing tired, something that Foxy noticed and started to laugh. He began moving the machine closer and closer, knowing that it was only going to be a matter of time before he was hit again by the beams of the machine. Chopper, Usopp, and Brook were all cheering Luffy on, despite the fact that he couldn't hear them. Just then, however, Luffy's eyes widened as if a light went on in his head and he spun around to punch the mirror, shattering it into pieces. That's at least 7 years bad luck right there, Robin stated calmly. That's what you're worried about. Usopp yelled. I never thought of that. Foxy screamed out as Luffy turned back around and jumped up to punch Foxy right in the face with his gum-gum pistol. Right in the kisser. Frankie laughed mockingly. Now infuriated, Foxy sent double beams out and all the boxing gloves were set ablaze. Though able to avoid the beams, Luffy couldn't avoid the gloves and everything went up in flames. Luffy. Chopper yelled in horror at the blackened memory. You can't lose, Luffy. Usopp yelled, you're Luffy and you've got an afro. I knew he'd win all along. Chopper said firmly, he was going to win us back. Of course he was, Robin smiled, and that afro is nice. Not you too, Robin. Nami moaned out. Just what is afro power? It's not something that can be understood, Usopp said seriously with a hand over his heart, it can only be felt. That doesn't even make sense. Nami cried out. Like Usopp-san said, Brook said, his hand to his own afro, as someone who's had an afro for most of his life, I know better than anyone the power it has. Nami just stared at him before she shook her head. She wasn't even going to ask anymore. The next memory appeared and they were back on the deck of the sexy Foxy, which was looking more beat up than ever. Through the cloud of smoke, Foxy stood tall with his fists held in the air, and Luffy was twitching slightly on the deck, the memory slipping in and out of focus as he fought to stay awake. But through all the cheering from the Foxy pirates, they could hear some of the memory Straw Hats calling, pleading, for Luffy to get up. And they were sure it was because he could hear their voices. Did Luffy suddenly find his second wind and began to push himself up to his feet. That's right, you show him. Usopp cheered as the announcer screamed out, he's up. Against all odds, Straw Hat is up. It seemed like he was down for the count but the fight goes on. It's afro power it has to be. The spectators cried out and Nami had to bite her tongue to keep herself from saying anything. Luffy stumbled a little, but he didn't fall. Finally, Foxy went to the sword that he wore in his pants, and he drew it to reveal a long snake-like blade of his slow beam. He swung it out and trapped Luffy's arms and legs inside it like shackles. What in the? Brook cried as Foxy laughed out, that's the slow beam sword. As I'm sure you could probably tell, I've restrained your arms and legs. Good luck with that, you're gonna need it. Luffy tried again and again to free himself, but Foxy then began to rapid-fire punch him once again. Luffy didn't move at all as Foxy punched for almost the full 30 seconds. Once it wore off, Luffy was sent flying backwards and slammed into the mast. This is just cheap, Frankie muttered angrily. Hitting someone who can't defend himself, cowardly, Brook added and they all nodded firmly. But Luffy wasn't done. He got back up and Foxy was now looking like the others before him who witnessed his determination, scared out of his mind. He looks like he's about to piss himself, Zoro smirked. Losing his cool completely, Foxy sent another slow beam at him, too injured to move this time, Luffy couldn't get out of the way. Slowed down once again, Foxy started punching once again, hitting so hard that he knocked Luffy right through the mast. Memory Usopp could be heard screaming at Foxy in the background. That beam is for cheaters. Try fighting like a man for once. But that would mean that he would lose, Sanji pointed out in mock puzzlement. Right, what were you thinking Usopp? But again, Luffy just got up. It reminded them all when he was fighting Don Krieg, and no matter what that jerk threw at him, Luffy just kept forcing himself to get up and take it. Coughing up blood, Luffy spoke, I won't let you take a single member of my crew, even if it kills me. Every Straw Hat, memory or not, was staring long and hard at Luffy. He was truly willing to die if that's what it took to get them back. As touched as they all were by his dedication, it left a bad taste in their mouths. Luffy always put the safety of his crew before his own. They all knew that Luffy would do anything to protect them, but they didn't want him to have to be the one to protect them anymore, they wanted to protect him for once. Foxy was freaking out, looking ready to turn and run away just to get as far as possible from Luffy. Why can't you just stay down? He demanded, you'll kill yourself. Not by your hands, Zoro muttered softly. But his own hands was another story, Luffy was going to kill himself if he kept pushing himself the way that he has been in the past. Though the life of a pirate is adventurous, it's also short. But Zoro made a mental promise that no one was going to die an early death with him on board if he could help it. His one eye looked sideways at the cook, well, maybe he might be too exception, but if the cook died, it'd be his own fault. But Luffy refused to back down. As Foxy's crew was now cheering for Luffy, Foxy yelled at his crew to remember that they were cheering for the enemy here before he tried to use his slow beam sword once again. Things were looking serious here. Luffy's legs were so battered that he couldn't dodge it for long and he fell to the deck. With him down, Foxy went to another cannon and fired a cannonball. After slowing it down, he threw a fox-shaped glider onto the ball and slowly began to make his way over to him. "He's joking, right?" Frankie asked. Memory Sanji screamed at Luffy that he was hit with the beam a few seconds before the ball so he could move as soon as he recovered and still avoid the attack. But that was hopeful thinking at its best. Luffy did dodge it like Sanji said, however using the glider, Foxy was able to turn in midair and still ended up hitting Luffy, sent him flying with a crash to the side of the ship. Laying there bleeding, Foxy jumped off the glider as it went back to normal speed again, and it flew straight towards him before it blew up. "He's beating Luffy to death out there." Chopper whimpered, wanting to transform and charge at Foxy for this. Is he really trying to kill him? Wouldn't be the first to try, Zoro reminded him, but his eyes were narrowed in worry as well. But as they all knew, Luffy got back up once again. He stumbled and almost fell over again before he was able to get back to his feet. But as he did, Zoro saw something glowing for a fraction of a second on Luffy's forehead. Luffy looked down near his hand and his eyes widened for a moment before he picked something up and held it in his fist. With a burst of renewed energy, Luffy charged again. Now both captains were going at each other's throats, both throwing rapid punches once again. Finally, Foxy was fighting one-on-one, but they all knew this wasn't going to last long. And sure enough, when both fighters were pushed to their limits, Foxy used one last slow beam on Luffy. Brook and Frankie froze, but the other smiled, knowing that Foxy had this one coming. The light was covering Foxy before Luffy fell to his knees, but he was still moving. It was Foxy who couldn't move. What happened? It's like it was all reversed. Frankie gasped out. Luffy may not be smart, Zoro smirked, but he is a genius when it comes to battle, that, and luck. A slight clatter caught everyone's attention and they looked back to see that a broken piece of a mirror fell from Luffy's glove to the deck. A mirror, Chopper repeated before he remembered where it had to come from. It was stuck in my afro, he whispered as he got back to his feet. I got it when I broke the mirror. This is why you shouldn't go bragging about your powers and their weaknesses to your enemies, Sanji said, shaking his head. Now Foxy can't move, Brook cried out happily. It's all over now, Robin smiled. Completely unable to move due to the effects of his own devil fruit powers, Foxy was unable to avoid a devastating punch from Luffy. Once he was down, Luffy wearily turned and began to walk up to the fox's figurehead once again as memory Usopp got everyone began to count down. And when the 30 seconds wore off, the memory faded with Foxy going flying high into the sky and hit the water outside the battlefield from the brunt of the attack, multiplied by the huge amount of the blows. Luffy stayed on his feet just long enough to let out a cry of triumph. Having fallen into the water and out of the bounds of the match, and unable to swim, the entire Foxy pirate crew called out in horror as they dove in after him. That was so cool. Chopper cried out in amazement, his eyes bright. He really came through for us there, Sanji smiled. He actually had me worried there for a moment. Afro power my butt, Nami said, shaking her head. That was a close call if I've ever seen one. And Foxy wasn't even fighting half the time. Hey now, don't disrespect the afro, Brook told her seriously as he patted his own fondly. He sure seemed freaked out when he saw Luffy getting back up, Usopp said with a smirk. Of course, Zoro said, and I don't blame him. His slow beam was his only trick, he wasn't anything without it. The fact that he had to keep running away in underhanded tactics to get what he wanted proves that. Like so many of the opponents that we'd seen in the East Blue, Foxy was lazy and relied on weapons to bail him out of trouble. Sad really, Sanji said, but hey, we're in the New World now. And the guys here are supposed to be tough enough not to rely on weapons like that to fight. Something to look forward to, Zoro smirked. They waited for the memories to come back up and when it did, they were all back on the grass with Luffy heavily bandaged up. He's a mess, Frankie pointed out bluntly. Thanks for pointing that out, Mr. Obvious, Nami said annoyed. Chopper just sighed in relief. He was glad that since the Foxy pirates were all so focused on getting Foxy out of the water, no one noticed him taking care of Luffy here. The memory was slightly hazy, the smiling faces looking at Luffy were blurry, but it cleared quickly as Luffy sat up suddenly, seemingly remembering what happened. Where am I? What happened? He cried out, staring around wildly. Is it over? Did I win? That wasn't just a dream, was it? Was it? You don't need to freak out, Memory Zoro reassured him, you beat him. Luffy relaxed as he fell back onto the grass. What a relief, he muttered. Yeah, you can say that again, Chopper said as they all laughed and Memory Usopp put Luffy's straw hat back on his head. Guess it would have been a real pain if y'all lost, past Zoro said in disgust. Imagine, being stuck on a boat with Foxy. Screw that, I'd quit being a pirate before I do that, Current Usopp nodded and they all silently agreed at that. They all seemed to enjoy each other's company just as Foxy got up and went over. At first, it seemed like he wanted to honorably congratulate Luffy for the match. In secret however, Foxy wanted to lay one last sneak attack on Luffy as an act of vengeance. Unfortunately for him, Luffy's rubbery body made Foxy's attack useless and Foxy instead fell on his face. Why doesn't this surprise me? Robin asked in amusement. He should have just left well enough alone, Nami said tiredly. With the final game of the Davy back fight won by the Straw Hats, Foxy and his crew waited anxiously for Luffy's decision. Chopper. Robin. Luffy said without any hesitation. Tears of joy in his eyes once more, Memory Chopper ran over to him and hugged him, telling him how happy he was as Robin smiled as she took the mask off and passed it back to Foxy. Current Robin smiled as well, remembering the surge of relief that washed through her at the thought of going back with her crewmates. She closed her eyes, once again wondering just when these guys had grown to be so important to her. Straw Hat starts off with two obvious choices, the announcer yelled out, the question is, who's he gonna pick next? Don't leave us hanging. I think that it'd be easier to figure out who not to take, Frankie muttered, knowing that Luffy was right in that no one could fit all these people on board the Mary. Guess I'll take your flag, Luffy answered, and they were all horrified at the thought. The ultimate shame to any pirate crew, Zoro smirked. They deserve it. You monster. Foxy yelled out in horror, you'll steal my poor crew of their livelihood without a second thought. Isn't that what they did to that other ship on the way here? Chopper asked. They're just sore losers, Sanji said firmly, and Foxy has no one to blame but himself for all this. He could have stopped the games after we won the roller race, and he didn't have to bet 500 of his crew on this one game. No, he was just an idiot, no doubt about it. But luckily for them, Luffy's a nice guy. I don't need your sail, Luffy answered, you gotta use that to go places after all. They all looked relieved, at least until they told them that they had their mark on their sails as well, but Luffy explained that he will just paint them a new one instead of the one taken. While this pleased Foxy and his crew, Luffy's drawing skills for their new Jolly Roger unfortunately depressed deeply the whole lot of them. If I had had to sail with a flag like that, I'd be ashamed to go out to sea, Sanji stated. I don't know, if they wanted to strike fear into the hearts of their enemies, then they sure have a way to do that. Nami laughed a little as the entire Foxy crew bowed as low as Foxy when he was depressed. Ah, you guys don't have to bow to me, Luffy laughed. We're not, they all screamed, but Luffy ignored them all as he took the flag down and jumped back to land. He was walking off, until he was reminded that he still had to pick another 497 crew members. We don't need any more, Luffy answered. Luffy loves getting new crewmates, but he wants to pick them out on his terms, not because he has to, Zoro said lightly. Then that should let Foxy off the hook, right? Brook asked. Yes again, Nami sighed. He's such an idiot. The rules are the rules. Foxy screamed at him, I don't care if you need them or not. You're gonna pick those crewmates right now. He's letting you guys go. Just swallow your pride and leave while you have the chance. Chopper groaned as he watched them. Luffy looked annoyed, like a little kid told to finish eating his vegetables. At least until Zoro reminded him that a crew has to follow their captain's orders no matter what. Everyone but Chopper and Nami smiled at that as if they understood what he was talking about. A grin appeared on Luffy's face in understanding. And so in the end, he ended up picking everyone from Foxy's crew except for Foxy, Prosh, and Hamburg. They sent Foxy off with his two remaining crewmates in a tiny sailboat and watched them off into the distance, screaming out threats. There's so many pirates here. Frankie said, what were you going to do with them? The easy way, Zoro smirked. And then Luffy turned back to the new crewmates and called if they were ready for their first orders. They all cheered, letting him know that they were ready for anything. What Luffy said next got a laugh from the present-day Straw Hats. You're all dismissed. You could see the sweat drop on each of them, and they were all too stunned to speak for a moment. You mean, you're kicking us off? Someone asked. Yep, you got it. Luffy answered. Captain's orders are absolute, Memory Zoro reminded them. So I don't wanna hear anyone complaining. Brook burst out laughing. This is just great. He cried out, it was just so blunt that I can't help but feel bad for them. Like we needed all those people anyway. Nami asked with a shake of her head. I don't care if you join your old crews again, or if you go back to Split Head, Luffy told them, but whatever you do, you can't stay with me. Smiling, he finished up by yelling, so long. Come on Luffy, current Sanji groaned as he watched them all climb on board the sexy Foxy, couldn't you keep some of the girls? The sexy Foxy pushed off from land, all of them going after Foxy, yelling that they belonged with him after all as everyone felt a sense of relief, glad that it was over. Well, Memory Nami sighed, I say that it's about time we leave here. Hold up, Nami, Luffy said, jerking his thumb behind them, there's something I gotta take care of first. She looked surprised but they followed after him as he led them all back towards Tanjit's house where he was with Shelly, who seemed to have completely recovered from her fall. Tanjit heard them approaching and turned to face them with a smile. You made it back, he called to them. All worked out in the end, Usopp said smiling as Luffy walked over to him and told the old man that they brought him a souvenir. And he held up the Jolly Roger. He gave it to him. Brook asked softly. To let him know that he didn't have to worry about anyone taking Shelly away from him again. Chopper smiled proudly and Brook felt as a surge of pride go through him as well. But Tanjit noticed all the bandages and instead asked in concern, "You're hurt, are you alright?" Luffy just smiled back. It's nothing. Knowing the other kids of injuries that Luffy has gotten over the years, I guess that's true, present-day Usopp laughed. Tanjit just smiled and said gratefully, "Thank you for your help." Shelly agreed as she neighed softly next to them. The memory was starting to disappear once again, but before it vanished completely, Memory Nami seemed to realize what this had been about. "Is that why you accepted the fight?" She asked him, "Because you wanted to help him. And here I thought you were just being stupid again." And the memory was gone after that, Luffy's voice echoing into silence, "Man, you're rude." "Like he's one to talk about manners," Sanji said. "So what happened after all that?" Brook asked interestedly. "Well, turns out that Tanjit's grandson showed up," Sanji said. "His grandson?" Frankie asked in surprise, didn't see that coming. "Yeah," Chopper said happily, "he had this giant pet mole and wanted to dig a hole all the way through the world. I could see the family resemblance in them." Robin laughed a little. "Anyway, it turns out that he could dig a way underneath the islands and reach the other villagers in no time at all," Usopp said happily. "They saw us off after that, telling us that they'll be praying for a safe journey for all of us." "That's so kind of him," Brook said happily. "So he didn't have to wait a long time to meet up with the rest of his friends, did he?" "No, he didn't," Chopper said smiling. "And I'm glad." As the next memory popped up, it was a bright day and the first they noticed was that Luffy, Robin, Sanji, and Nami were all walking up a steep hill. "Where are we now?" Frankie asked them curiously. "Don't know," Zoro said in mild confusion. "Do you guys remember this?" Robin's eyes suddenly widened as she said, "Wait, is this actually?" But then they heard Memory Usopp yelling from somewhere behind them, "Hey! Wait up!" They all looked to see the other three past versions of the Straw Hats coming up the slope to meet them. "Look, who we found." "Hey, Zoro!" Luffy called happily, waving back happily. "Oh, no," Current Robin whispered, suddenly remembering what this was about as Memory Sanji groaned at the sight of him, shifting the heavy bag of treasure on his back. "What's wrong, Robin-san?" Brook asked before he noticed that something was wrong with Zoro. The memory swordsman already had his bandana on and there was an empty look in his eyes as he slowly walked up towards them. Memory Sanji also noticed the dangerous look in his eye and looked tense, but Luffy didn't as he walked down towards him. "Decided to rejoin us then?" he asked him happily. "Rejoin? Since when did you leave?" Frankie asked as the others realized what was happening here. "You've got to be kidding me." Current Zoro yelled out as he smacked himself in the face. "Not this." "Not what?" Chopper asked just as Memory Zoro's eyes flashed slightly as if something snapped inside him. Both past Sanji and Robin warned Luffy to watch out, but as he looked back and asked what was wrong, Zoro pulled his blade out and tried to slice Luffy's head clean off. "What the hell?" Frankie yelled in shock as Brook screamed. "What were you doing?" Brook yelled at him as Zoro shook his head in shame. For a horrible moment, it looked like he had. Luffy managed to duck his head in time as the wind created from the blade caused his hat to go flying off. Memory Nami screamed in shock as the hat fluttered down and Luffy caught it and raised his head. "It wasn't completely his fault," Current Nami whispered. "I forgot about this." "You mean this is where we lost our memories?" Chopper asked in shock. "Looks like it," Robin answered grimly. "Your memories?" Brook repeated in shock. Later, Sanji told him as Luffy turned back to Memory Zoro and asked what the heck he did that for. Past Zoro didn't answer him as he looked behind him, that dangerous look still on his face and the smile faded from Luffy's face. The two looked at each other long and hard before Zoro pulled a second blade out, looking for a real fight. "Can someone please tell me what's happening here?" Brook gasped out. Sure, he'd seen Luffy and Zoro fight, but here, it looked like the swordsman was actually trying to kill Luffy. Memory Robin raised her arms, telling them both to stop until Sanji held up a hand to stop her, telling her that it wasn't a good idea to get involved, something was wrong with him. Zoro suddenly charged at Luffy once again. Usopp and Chopper screamed in fear and ran to hide behind some trees. Luffy dodged the attack before he was forced up into the trees. "That's kinda dangerous," Luffy said to him. "You should stop." "Yes, please," Brook croaked out nervously. Now he knew that these two were just about at the same level of strength, with Luffy perhaps a little stronger, but Zoro also used blades, Luffy's biggest weakness. Instead of answering him, Zoro hacked the tree down and almost hit Sanji and the girls. "I forgot about that," Sanji yelled furiously. "Hey, you stupid moss head. If you wanted to fight I'd be more than happy to take you on, but you stay away from Nami and Robin." "It wasn't my fault," Zoro yelled back. "Hey, if you had just kept watch like you were supposed to then none of this would have happened." Sanji yelled at him. "Hey, I was tired. How was I supposed to know this would happen?" Zoro yelled back. "You wanna sleep so bad, how about I make you sleep permanently?" Sanji roared back. "Shut up both of you." Nami yelled as she hit them both. "You're not helping things here." "Would someone mind telling me what is going on here?" Frankie asked, feeling more lost by the second as Luffy poked his head out of the leaves and down at Zoro. They could hear Memory Chopper behind them saying that he bet that kid put Zoro under some form of hypnosis. "Kid? What? A kid did all this?" Brook cried out as Memory Sanji dropped the sack to the ground and told them that they had to work together to beat him. But Luffy told them all to stay out of it. They were to go on ahead while he took care of them. Zoro. Memory Robin was the only one who smiled. Alright then, she said as she turned, let's get going. Come on. They tried to stop her, but she told them that they couldn't stop him. That their priority was to stop the memory thief and to leave it to Luffy. How can someone steal memories? Frankie asked, before realizing, but you and Luffy seem to be acting just fine. Robin. Because I was the only one at first who didn't lose my memory, she answered softly. Luffy did lose his memories as well, but he managed to get them back. But the others? Don't remind me, Nami said in embarrassment as she thought back to how she tried to get the others to join her and so that she could get them all home. She shook her head at her stupidity. Though she knew that it was understandable that she acted like that since she didn't have her memory, she couldn't help but it still made her feel deeply ashamed. However, as she glanced up at Zoro and took comfort in the fact that she hadn't been the one controlled by a seahorse. However, Robin led the others away as Luffy turned back to Zoro and the fight reassumed with Zoro now attempting to slice Luffy in half. But Luffy easily jumped out of harm's way before throwing a punch, which Zoro dodged, and breaking the tree right in half. As the smoke from the punch cleared, they could see that Memory Zoro put the white blade in his mouth and pulled the third sword out. He was done playing games. The present-day Zoro felt sick to his stomach watching this. Now he really wished that he got that damn seahorse and cooked it up for dinner. This was just humiliating. He watched as the two went at it, and he was reminded of their stupid fight back at Whiskey Peak. It was just as stupid here as it was then. Fighting and dodging each other's attacks, Luffy threw a Gatling at him, which his past self just danced around every punch before he took a good slice at him. Luffy avoided it, but as they now stood far apart, a slight cut appeared on Luffy's cheek showing that he hadn't completely missed it. He grinned as if he was enjoying it. How can he be having fun fighting against his own friend? Chopper asked in bafflement. The thrill of fighting a worthy foe, Zoro answered knowingly, though he had believed that he was supposed to take him out, he remembered feeling the surge of excitement rush through his blood. He didn't know who this guy was, only that he was his enemy, but this one was strong, he loved fighting him. He sighed as he came back to the present, he should have been able to fight off that stupid seahorse. He was never going to live this down. The empty look on Zoro's face was terrifying, like he was just a soulless demon aching for blood. Looking real scary there, Zoro, Usopp said nervously as he suddenly crossed two of his swords across his chest and they knew what was coming. Wait, he cried in panic, you're using that. You trying to kill Luffy? I don't know alright, he yelled back as his memory self cried out, Oni, Jiri. Luffy didn't have time to dodge it and the grin was wiped off his face as the attack hit. Two deep slices, in the form of an X on his chest, right where the scar that Luffy now carried today was. No one said anything to that, but they all had a strong sense of a dark foreboding in the pit of their stomachs when they saw it. Now the wound didn't look serious at all. In fact, Luffy was able to get back to his feet and the bleeding was minimal. But as soon as he saw it, a sense of overwhelming guilt rose up inside Zoro. He had no idea to how Luffy got such a scar after they were separated. One day when he asked Luffy about it, he said that he got it while at the war at Marineford but didn't say anything else about it. He knew that he must have brought up a touchy subject for Luffy and he didn't ask him again. But he couldn't help but wonder what had caused such a devastating scar, especially after seeing the kind of wounds that Luffy acquired through these memories. Seeing that tiny wound in the same place where that future scar would one day appear made him feel sick to his stomach, though he wasn't sure why. But the fight between the two went on, captain and swordsman, neither side gaining or losing an inch. They were able to attack and dodge, but neither one was able to actually give each other a hard enough blow. They ran through the forest as they continued to attack each other, taking down trees and boulders, anything that stood in their way. Finally, it was a stare down. They were going all out here. Past Zoro took his two swords and held them at an angle against each other and began to rotate them rapidly as Luffy threw his arms back. Oh no, Chopper yelled, shutting his eyes. He couldn't stand seeing them fight like this. He could hear their words though. 3 swords style, Oni, Jiri. Gum gum, bazooka. 3,000 worlds. He heard them clash but it all stopped so suddenly that he opened his eyes one again to see that the memory disappeared. What happened? The memory died there, Zoro answered. Just like that. Usopp yelled in shock, but who won? No one, Zoro answered, it was a stalemate. I don't really remember too much that happened after that. Okay, can someone tell me what's going on here? Frankie yelled since the memory was gone. What's this memory thief? How can you steal memories? And why were you fighting Luffy in the first place, Zoro? Robin stepped forward as Zoro gave Frankie a deadly look. She explained that one night while they were docked near a certain island, she was the only person who stayed awake. And it was because of that was she able to keep her memories. However, when she woke up, she found that the rest of the crew were all trying to figure out what happened since they had no idea to how they got there, with the last things they remember are the events right before Luffy arrived in their lives, and in Luffy's case, just before he ended up on Alvida's ship. Wow, I didn't think that was possible, Frankie said in amazement. That had to cause a lot of problems. It did, Robin smiled as the others blushed. Not just with Zoro here, but with everyone. Don't remind me, Chopper hid his eyes with his hat. I don't like that. Anyway, Robin said, since Zoro still believed himself to be a pirate hunter, and Nami had gone back to hating all pirates, they both left the ship. But who did it? Brook asked. I mean, was it a devil fruit who did it? Well, not exactly, Robin answered. You see, the next night, a boy carrying a seahorse came back to the ship, but we were all awake. Luffy attacked him and he got his memories back, but the boy had escaped. Once he remembered everything, he wanted to bring Zoro and Nami back, and when we came to the island, we found Nami. She looked to Nami and added, and you were anything but cooperative. I know, she sighed, rubbing her head. I'm sorry. And where were you guys heading? Frankie asked, remembering them walking up the hill together. I found a stone carrying ancient writing and found what really caused everyone to lose their memories, Robin answered. Yeah, and how come you started to attack Luffy like that? I mean, even if you thought you were still a pirate hunter. That wasn't like you, Brook asked him. He was hypnotized into attacking us by the same one who took our memories, Chopper said, and Zoro hit Chopper sharply over the head. Would you all let it go? He demanded. Yes, Robin answered. Anyway, to make a long story short, we managed to reach a lake and found the boy who tried to hypnotize all of us. Thankfully Sanji was able to kick the seahorse out of his arms and the boy ran away. But it turns out their target hadn't been the boy, who had been hypnotized like Zoro had been, but rather the seahorse. Wait, Frankie said as Brook's jaw fell open. You mean to tell me that it was the stupid seahorse who was behind everything? Yes, Robin answered, and not only did it steal the crew's memories, but it stole all the memories from the villagers on the island as well. But why? Brook asked in confusion. What's the point? What did the seahorse have to gain from taking memories? It was stupid, Sanji said. I'm just glad that I got the chase to kick that shitty seahorse around until it coughed up all the memories it took. Oh good, so everything went back to normal? Brook asked in relief. Not quite, Usopp sighed, remembering what happened next as the memory came back and they spotted Luffy staggering around slightly through the trees. He was alone, and seemed to be looking around for Zoro. They spotted him through the trees in a clearing near a lake, and he was already picking a fight with Sanji. Oh no, Zoro groaned. Luffy grabbed hold of some trees and pulled himself back like a slingshot. He rocketed himself into them so hard that they were sent flying across the water and crashed into a rock. Ow, Frankie winced. That was a cheat shot, Sanji hissed, rubbing his head in an irritated way, a flying attack from nowhere. They followed their past selves across the lake to where the three lay in a jumble of rock and limbs. Memory Chopper asked in worry if they were alright as Zoro slammed Luffy's head to the ground, demanding to know why he did that. Did you really have to ask? Nami asked him. You were trying to kill him. I got my memory back by this point. He retorted. Well, how were we supposed to know? Sanji demanded. You were glaring down at us like we were the enemy, so how could we tell if your memory was back? But Memory Usopp realized what Zoro said and asked, Zoro, did you just call him Luffy? Past Zoro didn't answer as he picked Luffy up and carried him out of the rubble as Nami asked if he got his memory back. Of course I did, he retorted angrily. Then stop looking so creepy. Memory Sanji snarled. If it really is back, he said before he grabbed hold of Zoro's face from behind him and twisting it up into a smile, then ACT like it okay. But a big smile on your face like this. I think that's creepier than anything else I've seen here, Current Usopp whispered, and they all nodded at that as past Zoro yelled at Sanji to stop it and hit him with Luffy. With Luffy forgetting who he was for a moment, he snapped out of it, and they all came to the understanding that they were on each other's side once again. Thank goodness for that, Brook sighed in relief, a hand over his chest to where his heart would be. I don't like seeing you fight like that. Well, it wasn't a picnic for us either, Sanji muttered. As they all began to talk about what was going on. Realizing that Seahorse Horn was the real culprit was brilliant, Robin my love, Memory Sanji said lovingly. What, so that was it? Luffy asked in surprise. Yes, Luffy, that was it. Past Usopp said in annoyance. You were the first one to get your memories back and you didn't notice. How rude. At least I'm better than Zoro. Luffy retorted, pointing to the swordsman who glared back and began muttering death threats. You know, he's right, Robin laughed a little and Zoro gave her a dangerous look. But things just turned even weirder as they began asking where that thing went. Memory Zoro answered that as he got up and went to the water's edge to see the shadow of the creature hiding below them. Seeing it, Zoro lost his temper completely, obviously thinking of how that thing manipulated him, and jumped in to get the seahorse, threatening to cook it for dinner. As they watched, Memory Usopp provided comedy for the others by narrating the fight. Using words that sounded exactly like what they would say. Everyone seemed to be fighting back their laughter as Zoro finally caught the seahorse after several minutes. Ha! Usopp said in a deep voice that sounded like Zoro's. There. I got you. You won't get away. And then everyone burst out laughing, even Robin couldn't hold it in, but they weren't the only ones, for most of the present-day Straw Hats all burst out laughing as well. Except for Zoro of course, who hit their Usopp hard over the head since he never had a chance to hit him here. You never could take a joke, could you? He whimpered, a huge lump on his head swelling up. The seahorse made several honking noises, and through his laughter, Chopper translated, "Now for my last resort." The laughter died down at that as they looked at the seahorse as it sprayed a pinkish-purple haze right into Zoro's face. The impact sent the thing flying and everything was covered in the mist. Now what? Frankie asked as most of the other Straw Hats, freezing as they all remembered what happened here. Through the hazy mist on the other side of the water they could just make out the forms of several people standing there. Who are they? Brook asked softly as a woman stepped through the mist first. Memory Nami gasped out along with the present-day one. They were staring at the woman who had red-violet hair with a unique hairstyle similar to a mohawk, a cigarette in her mouth, and holding a tangerine in her hands as she smiled directly at the Memory Nami. "No, it can't be." Memory Nami said, Is that you? Belmere, that was your mother's name, wasn't it?" Robin asked softly, remembering seeing the picture in the girl's room. "The one with Nami and her sister as children, and this woman there with them." "That's your mother," Brooke said softly, looking at the woman with new wonder. Tears were forming in her eyes as she nodded. To see her mother once more standing there, not just from a picture or in her mind, but to see her standing there as she had been when she was alive. She hugged herself tightly, remembering what Robin said about this island being connected to the land of the dead. She never really thought about it, but seeing her mother standing there once more awoke a sense of grief that she hadn't had in years. She wanted to speak with her again, she wanted to tell her how much she missed her and that she shouldn't have to worry about her again. Just then a man stepped out as well. He was a rather eccentric-looking guy with a very strange gray hair that stood out on either side of his head and was wearing a top hat that matched his coat over his head. He had a big grin on his face that reminded them all of Chopper. "Doctor." Memory Chopper cried out, tears in his eyes. "Dr. Harulik," Sanji asked, "so that's the man that adopted you?" Chopper didn't answer him as he burst out sobbing, burying his face into Robin's shirt when she stopped him from running over and hugging his dad again, knowing that it was just going to break Chopper's heart when he remembered he couldn't touch him. The next person appeared, but this time it was someone they all knew. It was Kaya from Usopp's village, looking 10 times healthier than they last saw her, and she beamed at the sight of Memory Usopp. Kaya," he gasped out, a river of tears falling from his face. Are you feeling better?" The current Usopp didn't cry, but he couldn't stop the sad smile coming to his face. Not a day went by that he didn't think of his dear friend, and he always hoped that she was healthy again, and following her own dreams back home. His hand went to his bag where he secretly kept one of the flags of the Usopp Pirates as a memento of his childhood. Had it already been so long since he left home? He was no longer the awkward gangly kid he once was. No longer did he think himself useless or run in fear. He'd become much more self-assured and was able, willing in fact, to stand beside his crew in battle. He couldn't wait to go back and see his home again someday. He wanted to become someone who Kaya would be proud to say was his friend. To their surprise, it was a child who appeared from the mist next. A girl who couldn't have looked more than 11 or 12 years old. They stared at her dark blue hair and dark brown eyes, realizing that she looked like a child version of the Marine officer Tashigi. None of them had any idea to who she was, but they noticed that she was smiling at the past version of Zoro, and Brook also saw that the white blade was in her hands as well. "Zoro-san," he asked softly, "do you know her?" Zoro didn't answer as he looked at her long and hard, his past self staring at her as if he had seen a ghost, which he was in many ways. "Yeah, I knew her," he said simply as he looked on, feeling a sense of pain. But it was different than from what the others were feeling. For he had seen her earlier, hadn't he? Maybe he was dreaming then, but he had been sure that he had seen her there taunting him to prove that he was stronger than when he used to lose to her. "It's nothing," he muttered, but his hand went to the white sword at his side as he continued to look at her. 3 more people also appeared after that. All 3 they knew as well. The first was a man that could only be Zeph, only here he was much younger. The cigarette in Memory Sanji's mouth fell as he stared at him. The Zeph here was muscular and instead of a pegged leg, he had 2 normal ones and was dressed as a pirate captain instead of a chief. This was obviously when he was still in his glory days as a pirate. He stood tall and proud, looking ready to take on the world. Current Sanji didn't say anything as he looked on, wondering just how that miserable old bag of bones was doing now. He had always planned on returning to the Bharati someday and tell him the kind of place the All Blue was. That old man better still be alive and kicking, though he had to admit, the fart may outlive them all how stubborn he was. He couldn't help but smirk at that last thought. And finally, the last 2 people were also ones they'd seen before, Ace and Shanks. Both of them looking just like they had seen them. Unlike the other Straw Hats, Luffy was grinning ear to ear at the sight of them. "How are you guys doing?" he called to them happily. It was a surreal moment, the people that they had cared about the most all standing there together. "Why didn't you see anyone, Robin?" Frankie asked quietly as Chopper continued to sob against her. She smiled sadly, feeling glad that she didn't see anyone and bring back all those bad memories, "because my mind was never drained of my memories like the others," she answered softly, "so the seahorse didn't know about me." But suddenly, the forms of the 7 people disappeared in a bright golden light so that 6 other people took their places: Arlong, Wapol, Don Krieg, Kuro, Crocodile, and Eneru. That would have sucked if they were real, Sanji muttered as their past selves all looked freaked out for a moment before Luffy started yelling out that he'd take them all out at once as they circled around them like ghosts. Please, you were almost killed when fighting most of them, Zoro retorted, but he had to admit, that would have been an interesting fight. If Luffy fought Eneru, he'd fight Crocodile, why not? But then the forms all came together and exploded in a massive ball of light so bright that they covered their eyes, their past selves all frozen, unable to move, as the seahorse looked down at them from a rock. Chopper translated for them what the seahorse was saying. That thanks to them interfering, he lost all the memories he stole from the villagers. But the memories from the 7 of them should be enough for him to transform. Just then, the seahorse was bathed in the bright light and engulfed the land. The past Straw Hat's eyes became blank and empty as they stared into the light, but when it died down, all they saw was that the seahorse was fat like a balloon. What is that? Frankie asked, feeling a huge letdown at that. He had been expecting to see something a hell of a lot cooler than that. Like I said, it was stupid, Sanji muttered. Luffy then pointed a shaking finger up at it. What's that? He thought it over for a second before he added, and who am I? He looked to the others, and who are you guys? You all lost your memories. Brook cried out as they were all looking around in confusion as well. In memory Zoro popped out of the water. It absorbed all our memories, Nami sighed as she looked to the blank look on her past self's face, staring around on her knees from where she fell down. Luffy looked down at Zoro and called, Hey, you Mr. Drowning Guy. Do you know who I am? No dumbass. He shouted back. You may not have your memories but I can tell that your bad attitude is still there, Sanji sighed. Funny how that works, Robin said as the seahorse honked again. In memory Chopper translated that he said that he had become a millennial dragon. You mean that's a millennial dragon? Frankie asked, remembering when they spoke about them before. No, Zoro said, they come from eggs, you can't just become one. I don't think this guy ever saw one if you ask me. If he honestly believed that he was a dragon. Meanwhile, Memory, Usopp and Luffy were staring at Chopper in amazement that he could understand that thing. But then they realized that he was talking and Usopp gasped that he was a talking raccoon dog. Chopper was looking horrified and cried out, I'm a raccoon dog. This is so embarrassing, Chopper called as they all laughed. We all know the feeling, Chopper, Nami nodded, we were all made to look stupid from this experience and I think we'd all like to forget it. Luffy however was staring up at the seahorse with wide eyes, like a little kid wanting to ride a pony for the first time. He then came right out that he wanted to ride it. Memory Usopp told him that he was crazy and that he couldn't get up there anyway. But Luffy walked backwards, looking ready to jump anyway, but his foot got caught as he fell off the cliff and he stretched out so that when he was shot up, he was able to grab hold of the seahorse, sounding surprised that his arms and legs could stretch as the others below stared in horror. This is just funny watching all this, Nami sighed, and by funny, I mean stupid. As Luffy hung on, the seahorse started to let go of the memories, and Luffy remembered what was going on here. And so, in the end, he was able to take out the seahorse, kicking it so hard that the memories came out in the glittering blue mist and the seahorse was sent flying. The memories returned to their owners and Luffy landed on the ground as they smiled happily. But as the memory faded, they couldn't help but look at the X-shaped mark on Luffy's chest before they returned to the night sky.